Hi, welcome again to session 4, Streets in the Neighborhood. Streets, especially Indian streets, are likely the most contested commons. There are many programmatic contingencies written into the space, from large numbers of pedestrians to hawkers to numerous modes of transport, all occupying the street. And often as planners, as traffic planners, we tend to resolve the congestion issues by just resolving movement patterns with arrows denoting rerouting, aspiring to minimize conflict. But clearly, the condition is more complex, and the constraints are a juxtaposition of ephemeral forces as well as those that manifest materially. So, streets are occupied in ephemeral ways by a spectrum of actors, ranging from vendors to the familiar pedestrian, but also the material manifestation in terms of the details of the sidewalk, the occupation of space by street furniture, etc., pose another layer. How do we contrast and make viable these two realms? Today, we have three speakers who will describe a different approach, a more bottom up approach in influencing policy, implementing projects, and people's participation in deciding how to layer the activities on the street. Our first speaker is Swati Ramanathan, co founder of the Jana Group, which is a remarkable group of social initiatives aimed at urban transformation in India. Swati co-founded Jana with her husband Ramesh over 20 years ago, and together they have set up a family of NGOs that work with citizens to make a difference. Examples of her work include the Jaipur Master Plan 2025, the TENDER S.U.R.E, which stands for Specifications for Urban Utilities and Road Execution, guidelines which pioneered urban road design in India, the National Urban Spatial Planning and Development Guidelines at the behest of the Ministry of Urban Development. And in 2013, she was the co-convener of the Urban Planning Group for the Planning Commission, and she writes regularly also on urban issues. Our next speaker is Prasanna Desai, who practices in Pune. Prasanna is a professor and director of the PVP College of Architecture and has been the person behind FEED, the Forum for Exchange and Excellence in Design, an academic platform for students and architects in the city of Pune. He runs an architectural practice which is involved with urban design issues, emphasizing the role of an architect in the public domain, with a people participatory approach focusing on equity and empathy to evolve an approach in affordable housing for the masses. He firmly believes that as an architect, with our training and skill set, need to play a larger role and contribute in the quality of the built environment. And next, we have Nidhi Gulati, who is the Senior Director of Programs and Projects at Project for Public Spaces in New York, where she manages multiple programs. And before moving to New York, she was in Boston and at Livable Cities Alliance, which develops innovative and equitable transportation solutions that create safe, affordable, and convenient options in Metro Boston. Nidhi is a trained architect and urban researcher, and ingrained in all her work is a commitment to better serve the most vulnerable populations in our cities and towns, including women and children. Vineet is an urban planner and infrastructure specialist working with challenges at the intersection of policy, technology, and ecology. Vineet is Associate Director of AECOM's Asset Advisory Services Center of Excellence and Principal Researcher with the Terraform Center for Advanced Urban Research. He works with communities, government, and multilateral organizations, infrastructure, owners and operators, and academia to deliver strategic planning and policy, cross-sector infrastructure and development, and to strengthen livelihoods through ecological and heritage conservation. So let's begin. I now ask Swati to present her work. Thank you.
Planners. Compliments to the wonderful efforts of Nolita and her entire team in pulling this together. I have been tasked with talking about the impact on policy as applied to this specific topic of streets in my neighborhood. So let me begin with the context to our work and the institutions for public change that we have founded. I say we because this is a joint journey of both my husband and I. We left India to go to the United States soon after we got married, in our early 20s. And as with most of the ambitious youth of our generation, we went there focused completely on ourselves, of studying in great universities, having professional careers there, traveling, making money, savings. And while we achieved these goals, our experiences there profoundly changed us. No society is perfect, and the US has its own share of issues, especially now with so much divisiveness going on. But there was much to be admired there as well. We wondered how it was that they had managed to provide such a better quality of life and how everything worked there, by and large. The snow got cleared after the worst of storms, garbage got picked up, roads and infrastructure were superior, everybody had access to parks, education, playgrounds, wonderful museums for art and science and history. We were also struck by how much people volunteered there. 1 out of every 4 Americans in local schools, in old age homes, feeding, homeless shelters, even in political campaigns. And we thought, what is it in this society that allows so many people to dream big and succeed by the sheer dint of their effort and to improve their lot in a single generation? It struck us as a society of far greater participation and of far greater demands for accountability from their governments, of self-reflection and a desire to be better. And what we discovered was that it was not built by government alone. It had required and continues to require generations of ordinary citizens who cared enough to make extraordinary changes, to make a difference in how things worked there. And it allowed then people like us to make a life there for ourselves and enjoy great jobs and a great quality of life. Our experiences there essentially inspired us to no longer limit our goals to revolve around just ourselves. And so we chose instead to leave our careers and our lives and to return to our own country. In some sense, we embarked upon a new and different journey, motivated simply by a larger purpose to do our bit here in India. Upon our return in 2001, approximately, we started Jana Group with a grassroots mobilization of citizens in their neighborhoods. It was quite large in scale and unprecedented in urban India. We had over 250,000 citizens in Bangalore participate. So until the Aam Aadmi movement, we hadn't seen anything like it in urban India before. And what we did was we organized local communities around 2 campaigns initially. One was called Ward Works, and it was on municipal budgetary allocation in their communities. And the other was called the Ward Vision campaign, and that was on participatory planning of their neighborhoods. And since then, over these last 2 decades, we have built a clutch of institutions with a central focus on urban transformation on scale. And these institutions work somewhat like a string of pearls around 2 key goals. Can we have the first slide, please? One, to improve the quality of life in our cities, And we define quality of life as both quality of infrastructure and services, as well as quality of active citizenship. The second goal is on inclusion for the lower socioeconomic segment of the population. And our focus is on financial inclusion and affordable housing. Each institution has its own area of focus and area of impact, which has informed its institutional structure and specialized leadership team. So Jana Small Finance Bank and Jana Aadhaar are social enterprises. Jana SFB currently serves over 4.5 million families and employs about 15,000 people. It's pretty much present across the country in about 500 locations and provides a range of products for the underserviced, both on the consumer side as well as for the micro and nano enterprises. Jana Aadhaar is focused on affordable housing and has delivered 1,500 homes to families in 2 cities and is now moving to the next phase in building affordable housing. Jana Graha is structured as a trust. Since those early days of mobilizing the demand side participation, Jana Graha has scaled civic participation with online platforms and mobile apps that have been very successful, from global to local scale. Some of you might recall Jago Re, a campaign for the registration of first-time voters. It was in partnership with Tata Tea. IPaidAbribe.com, which allowed citizens to report on what we call retail corruption, captured the imagination around the world and spread to several countries, over 30. Swachhata is a platform with an app which is in partnership with the Ministry of Housing and Urban Poverty Alleviation in the central government and used across India in over 1,000 cities. And iChangeMyCity.com is a hyper-local civic change platform which was started in Bengaluru and then expanded to several cities in Maharashtra and was then taken to Chandigarh. And as of last month, we have most recently signed an MOU with Panjim. Jana Urban Space, or Jana USP for short, is structured as a Section 8 company, and it focuses on the spatial transformation of our cities. So we work on urban plans, urban design projects, and on architecture, much of which is on affordable housing. Our policy work in both Jana Graha and Jana USP is deeply informed by our doing and vice versa. For any good idea to scale, there are 3 aspects to consider. First, scale requires government. An idea cannot achieve scale without the government participating in it. But government has a tendency to co-opt people and initiatives. So one has to walk the fine line of constructive engagement. That's between mindless confrontation and toothless collaboration. Second, the pressure for change on scale must be relentless and urgent, but it must be accompanied by great patience and commitment to the idea to stay the course, what we call urgent patience. Third, being only a think tank limits the understanding of how real change actually happens on the ground. And doing without reflection limits the ability to promulgate the idea. And a good idea, therefore, needs both: to think, to do, to learn, and to do again. We call ourselves do tanks that think. So with this institutional background, let me get to the evolution of TENDER S.U.R.E, our streets redesign initiative. Around the year 2009, I came out of talking at yet another conference on mobility in Bangalore. It seemed to me that all we did was talk, with nothing much ever happening on the ground. And I came out really dejected. And as I stood there, resolving never to participate in these events again, there was my aha moment, right in front of me. The road, it was jammed with vehicles of all types jostling against each other. Auto rickshaws, motorbikes, buses, cars, people walking haphazardly. It was, even the footpath that I was standing on was utterly and completely broken. In any event, nobody could walk on that because of the obstacle course of poles and transformers and trees. I saw the side drain, it was loaded with black water, some sewage. The road in the meantime had water supply leaking out of it. We had cables hanging everywhere. in a nutshell, that road to be represented everything that was wrong about how we were going about solving the problem. And that is when I decided that the first thing that had to be done was actually work on redesigning the urban road, and in its totality, not just as pedestrian or the cycle movement, NMT, metro, BRT. No, it had to be a complete and total redesign from what was on the road, what was the subterranean terrain of the road, and what was above the road. And beyond that euphoria of saying, my God, this is the aha, and the emotional aspect of the idea, the analytical reasons too actually made sense. And if you think of the urban cities, 20 to 30% of our space is actually occupied by the roads in the public realm, what we all use commonly. It was also used democratically by everybody: rich, poor, children, older people, regular people, car drivers, pedestrians, cyclists, all of it. Across socio-economic group and across user types, the road was an important public realm good. And because it's not just a transport network, it holds all the other 7 utility networks underneath it as well. And these networks are actually comprise most of the spend in municipal areas in our cities, beyond the parks and the stray other things like solid waste, etc. The networked infrastructure, which is roughly about 60% to 80% of our spend, was all carried under the roads. And because it's the first public space, when we come out into our communities, into our neighborhoods to talk to our neighbors, when we step out of our homes, it's the road which hits us. But more than anything else, it is because it can be fixed one stretch at a time. And unlike a master plan, I had just come out of working on the Jaipur Master Plan, and which takes about 20 years, any number of decades to actually fruition and show on the ground. And so much of the challenges of the master plan, which are implementation and enforcement, you're lucky if 40% of what you plan for is pretty much 100% success, and you really can't see it until many years later. The road, however, you could see one stretch at a time. It could be expanded. I want to just take you all through a short video which gives you a brief understanding of how we went about this, and then I'll come back to the actual how we went about doing it.
Is actually the conduit for all the other networks which impact my quality of life. That's the underground network which is supposed to collect all the rainwater and prevent flooding. That's the one which brings in my water supply, power, data cables, etc., and carries out my sewage. So the road becomes this conduit which networks the entire city. But today the municipality comes and lays the road. We have multiple agencies waiting in the background. They seem to wait until the road is laid by the municipality, then come and dig it up, one by one by one. And so you're back to square one. That road nobody would believe was done 6 months ago. Einstein said insanity is doing the same thing over and over, but expecting a different result. TENDER S.U.R.E fixes the design of the road itself, but also the design of the utility corridors. Every agency has been allocated a utility corridor with regular access chambers under the footpaths. No agency should dig the roads anymore. We started with saying no more of build poorly, cut repeatedly, rebuild poorly. Instead, let's aim for cut once and fix once and for all.
TENDER S.U.R.E seemed to me a very good thing because for the first time we were looking at urban roads with much higher and better specifications which would be more sustainable.
This is change that people can see. It dramatically improves their quality of life. It improves the walkability, revitalizes their neighborhoods, improves safety and security. It just improves the experience of the streets.
I believe that urban India, at least as far as the roads and cities are concerned, should be a completely different picture if TENDER S.U.R.E specifications and TENDER S.U.R.E model becomes the basis for road making. I think it's a big leap forward.
People asked, why such wide footpaths? Why has the road surface reduced? Well, it's like Bernoulli's principle. If you put plenty of water in a wide funnel, it will still drip slowly at the pinched end of the funnel. So also, if you let in 100 cars at the widest part of the road, but only 10 can go at the narrowest, we have not eased traffic, we've simply created a traffic jam. Our city roads are filled with such traffic jams. What we have done in TENDER S.U.R.E is designed for the narrowest part of the road and given the rest for parking, bus space. It has dramatically improved the flow of traffic. And in spite of zero land acquisition, we have protected all the old trees in this project. We have provided space to accommodate the same number of street hawkers.
I'm working as a project coordinator in this project. So this project is first of its kind project in India, so which has really inspired us, and we have learned a lot of things from this project.
So once the aha moment was there, how do you take an idea like this and take it forward? The first thing that we did was to actually look at the guidelines, because we knew that we needed to show something which was different from the IRC and the NHAI. We needed standards which were specific to urban roads. We needed something which would create guidelines and standards, because any kind of replication or scale requires some standardization which people can follow. So our first task was actually to look at the TENDER S.U.R.E guidelines. We developed the guidelines, and then I took it. We had a platform of opinion leaders and industry bodies, etc. So I ran that by them and said, what do you think of this idea? And they were all unanimously appreciative of the idea and completely put their backs to it and said, let's go ahead with this. So the next step was to actually meet with government. We were really fortunate because we had an amazing chief secretary there, the senior most bureaucrat, as well as the principal secretary to the chief minister, and both of them said, so how is this different? And we explained to them, look, this is how it's different. Currently, you're in an endless cycle of build, cut, and rebuild. And this is why, our roads are the way that they are, because you're not looking at the subterranean parts of it. So what TENDER S.U.R.E does is look at all three elements, not just the ROW, the right of way of the road, but also what's the subterranean on it, and then all the embellishments that actually make the experience of the road so great for the user. So this is what's different about it. We also talked about how it was. So they asked us, how is it being done currently? And we showed them. On the left, this was the old way, a single sheet of just the roads marked that had to be done. And this was a tender that we found, which was just 2 months before. And below that, one single cross section of a road for that entire network of roads that was going to be done. Only the camber and the slope of the camber, and then the drain, which is in the side. Some of you might remember and might have this still happening in your cities, where you have the granite drains, the box drains at the side against the building. And that was about it. That's all they gave. And what we proposed was to actually design it completely, lane by lane, and also footpath by footpath, stretch by stretch, intersection by intersection. So what you see there is the before and then the after, the designed part of it. So we explained this to him. We also talked about the travel lanes, and we said that the travel lanes, we would change that urban roads and national highways to stick to a standard of 3.5 meters was really a kind of it just didn't make sense in our urban roads, because you really needed to cut the cloth to fit the body, and we really had only a limited amount of ROW, and we showed how other countries didn't stick to the 3.5. So whatever the engineers were insisting upon on the 3.5, this was a fallacy. There was a second reason also that we gave them. We said that the moment you have 2 lanes of 3.5 and 3.5 meters, you're actually creating 3 or 4 or 5 lanes, because suddenly you'll have squeezed in two-wheelers and auto rickshaws and everybody coming in. So that 2 lane is really not a 2 lane. And so we needed to redesign the standards, the travel lanes themselves very differently. We talked also about streamlining the subterranean networks, and we told them how we proposed that to take all of the networks and take them away from the travel lanes, to put them below the footpath. And not only to put them below the footpath so that whenever there is any maintenance that requires, the traffic is undisturbed and there is no jam. But we also talked about how we would do it, that each of these individual networks would have its own line, which there was not so far. Currently, if you open it up, it's like a ball of wool, in a square meter that a cat has opened up, some 10 balls of wool. We said here, we will actually design it such that every agency has space for its own line, and when they open it to maintain it, to expand it, whatever, they didn't touch anybody else's line. So they found all of this very useful. But the chief secretary also asked me for another thing. He, in his most inimicable way, a gentle manner, he said, you also talked about the tendering being a problem. Can you also create standards, new standards for how we should do the procurement process? And so that was volume 2 of Tender S.U.R.E. And what that had was simplified contractor specifications. What was currently happening was multiple references to various documents. And within each of these various documents, there were multiple clauses and reference to various sub-clauses, amendments to those sub-clauses. And I cannot believe that any contractor, most of whom were only basic pothole fillers for the municipality, were actually looking at these BOQs and these contracts and following any of this. The second was that in a Tender S.U.R.E. design, the enforcement of the design standards became all important, which means not only was there somebody as a watchdog to make sure that the design standards were followed, the material specifications were followed, that there was testing and there were quality checks. So the rigor of actually the implementation became much higher. In terms of actually procurement, DPRs had to begin with total station surveys. They had to have their design drawings, their engineering plans, and the technical specifications that were provided to the contractor before he or she began the work. We also talked about a single contract. The current process was, and the engineer's tendency was, that it would be a series of subcontracts. So a Tender S.U.R.E. road would typically, in the old way, have 10 subcontractors. This was one of the most significant changes that we made, which is to say that you have to have a single agency take the entire contract, because that then makes the accountability much more manageable. It's one contractor to the agencies and the multiple individuals, individual agencies and departments that had to be involved in the execution of a holistic Tender S.U.R.E. road. And finally, the interagency project planning and management. What comes first and what comes after? So that entire project plan and the project planning and how each agency would manage their assets, both the existing as well as the new, became a part of the procurement contract. So the Tender S.U.R.E. guidelines were embraced. The political system was extremely happy, delighted at that time, and they launched the Tender S.U.R.E. guidelines and they announced the first of the Tender S.U.R.E. projects. Now, at this point, we agreed that we would, since we had the brainchild of the Tender S.U.R.E. was conceived by us, it behoved upon us to actually do the first set of designs. And so we embarked upon all of the design drawings for all of these pilot roads. Finished the designs and then we gave it to them, and the engineers came back and said, yeah, but we also need to know the bill of quantities for this. And we worked with the engineers and we were aghast by how they were going about it, because it was impossible to know how to read that BOQ in the manner that it was done. Each line item would appear multiple times across like 300, 400 line items, and nobody had a clue what that line item was. Where it was that we were adding that cement in line item 14 versus line item 47. So this became another exercise where we cleaned up the entire bill of quantities and the formatting and made it in a manner where it was structured and easy to kind of look at the progress of the project and the payment of the project. But look at this, then once we gave that, we thought our job was done. At each of these stages, every time I thought my job was done, I was in for a shock and said, no, it was still not done. So now the contractor said, well, I don't know how to go about doing this. And so we said, yes, well, you need good for construction drawings. And we said, who's going to do those? Well, Jana USP ended up doing all of the good for construction drawings. We had over 1,000 sheets and blueprints that we had to produce for just these set of pilot roads. But once we finished the drawings and we handed those off to the engineers and the contractor, there were so many operational challenges when we dug up the road. It was a nightmare inside. Nobody knew, not a single agency, the power, the water supply, you name it. None of them knew where their assets were, neither their point assets nor their line assets. So this, for example, is on one of our St. Mark's Road at the intersection of Church Street and St. Mark's Road, where the water supply sewage board said that it's probably at this depth, the line. And we ended up going to great depths to finally actually find the sewer. Look at this. We insisted that each of the agencies and their engineers be involved in forecasting and their requirements and actually working with us on the requirements where we were there to handhold them throughout. They needed to also be part of the process of actually owning those assets. And so, for example, here we have a 900 mm stormwater drain, which the municipality said that they needed so that, it could take care of all the flooding. But when we started putting it up, and because we were doing it stretch by stretch, not the entire 1 kilometer stretch, for example, we were doing it at 200 meters or so. When we opened it up, we found that there were all these barriers to laying that 900 mm line. There were existing water lines, multiple mystery cables, which none of the agencies took responsibility for or took ownership for. So we had to deal with all these crazy cables in there. We then had to also give access chambers, because one of the things, as you might recall, I had said was that each of the agencies, if there was maintenance or if there was future requirements, then the way they accessed their lines was through access chambers. And each agency had an access chamber anywhere between 10 meters to 30 meters, depending upon which line it was. So the footpaths were quite, intricately planned with all of these chambers. But when we went to cast these chambers in situ, again, we found all these existing ducts and lines, etc., which created a real challenge to provide them. So we had to also work with these kinds of challenges. Similarly, when we opened up the grounds, part of it was when we were finishing, we had to compact it, whether it was the footpath or the road itself. But when we opened it, every time we tried to compact it, it kept sinking. And so we dug up further and we found lines like this. We didn't know if it was sewer, water, none of the agencies knew either. And this thing kept dripping some kind of a liquid into the earth, which therefore kept sinking whatever the surface that we were playing. So we had to work with these kinds of things and resolve these kinds of situations as well. We had 5-star hotels who we found had stealthily taken all of their sewage up to their property lines and then let it into the stormwater drain. And that stormwater drain just didn't have the capacity to take all of the sewage of all the guests of that hotel. And so the sewage kept spilling out onto one of our main roads, Residency Road. It kept spilling out onto the road. So this is the kind of stuff. So we had to deal with this, take action against them, get the municipality to deal with it. So all of these were part of our challenges. The telecom was a nightmare, like 7, 8 of them. I mean, to untangle these cables was another huge challenge. The operational challenges continued because also with the engineers, to get them to work together, to get them all to come together. This was during the signing, the first, even before we actually put out the contract for the contractor. The water supply, power, and the municipality, it was quite historic. They gave their documents and their BOQs and their requirements. They all agreed and there was a handshake to say, okay, this is the totality and this is the integration between agencies around a simple thing called a road. But we had tremendous problems with the engineers. One person would come and say, yes, this is our requirement. For example, power lines, we need 3 conduits, which will take care of everything. So we go ahead and put the 3 conduits, finish it all, the cross cable from left-hand side of the footpath to the right-hand side. And then 6 months later, the next guy comes and says, oops, sorry, we need 6. Now we had to rip this all out and again give that. So these were like some of the serious challenges that we had. And similarly, the water supply guys would come and say that we actually only need cables for water supply, which is going to go by pumping. We don't need gravity flow. So we lay the entire line based on that, on those levels, and then 3 months down the line, he says, oops, sorry, the next guy comes and says, oh, he didn't know what he was talking about. Actually, this is fed by gravity and not by pump. So you need to actually change all the levels. You have to deal with all of this. And in the meantime, you have a restless political guy who are getting the political system, which is getting blamed and criticized. People are getting inconvenienced. Media is criticizing. And all of this was happening during the same time. So then we created a principle and we put our foot down and we said every agency had to sign off on anything that we were doing before we would undertake it, because it just became too easy to do a tutu meh and nobody takes ownership of the decisions that the previous guy had made. I come to my fourth challenge in the journey, and this was the engineering department issues itself. So in all of these agencies, from the municipality to every other agency, it is an exclusively male-dominated club with large egos, with people saying, I have PhDs, 30 years of highway experience, all of that, and finding it really hard to work with a woman, especially outside the system. This was a domain that has been, completely captured by engineers, and nobody else even knows what's happening. The second is the signing authority. Contractors ultimately respond on the ground because their payment is done by the engineers. They are the ones who sign off on the bills. And this is an undue amount of power that is there with the contractors. I mean, we've seen abuse. In Tender S.U.R.E, this was simply not possible because of the kinds of accountability measures and the PMC and everybody that we had. But many of us are familiar, a project is given on a municipal road, and the next thing you know is you have a political powerhouse who says, why don't you shift some of the works onto my road as well? And so that first project gets shafted and then it's split between these two, and there's no accountability. So that kind of authority over contractors is rampant, and Tender S.U.R.E kind of actually counters that. And finally, there's vested interest to maintain the status quo, because this is now, again, the bureaucrats don't have the time to oversee the engineers and to get into the kind of details that the engineers have. And the engineers, really, they have the ability to make this so complex that it's impossible to even decipher on the ground. So it's in their interest to maintain the status quo. And a project like Tender S.U.R.E really threatened that status quo. It threatened that it would show up for somebody who's been working with 30 years of experience. And why did it take somebody like a Jana USP to come and show you how to do a road when you have thousands of kilometers of roads, which which are clearly proof of your engineering, exemplary engineering experience? And so we found very often on the road, they would come and pressure the contractor to just change things randomly. So for example, suddenly they changed the center line, and that actually changed everything for us. And we didn't know until 3 months down the road, because everything is dug up. You can't really see that much. And so we suddenly found that the alignment of our stormwater grating had shifted, and it wasn't actually below the drain itself. And it was like, we were scratching our heads, and that's when we realized that these changes are made. And it's without letting us know. So it took a lot to get these engineers on board. And finally, the fifth one is the transitioning of the political regimes. We started with the BJP government, and there was a transition in the middle of power, and the political party that came into power was the Congress. And the Congress came and said, they were wonderful, and it's amazing how a good idea actually finds political favor regardless of party lines. And I think Tender S.U.R.E proved that. And in spite of the chief minister having to sustain so much criticism while the work was going on, it really inconvenienced everybody. There was a lot of media criticism, and he really went back and said, we're going to stop this. And then and I knew that it was just a matter of time. He needed to complete 2 roads and show what the power of Tender S.U.R.E was. And he came for the inauguration with all of his ministers. He saw it, and he was just blown away. And he not only said, this is fantastic, I've been watching this and it's amazing, but he then went on to announce 50 more at that point in time. So he went from being a skeptic to a complete supporter after his ground launch and his ribbon cutting. It became the plank on which they put all of their, when the elections came, what they had done. One of the biggest things which kind of dominated their communication was the Tender Show project. So where are we today? I think that from those early days of inconvenience and criticism, I think by and large I can say that the public is completely supportive. Tender Show is extremely popular with residents in Bangalore, with communities, with people. Everybody wants a Tender Show. And scale, from the first package that we went in 2016 that we completed, we've now got Tender Show roads happening everywhere. You saw that the entire CBD of Bangalore is going to be a Tender Show sort of a CBD road. It also went to Hubli and Dharwad. You saw some of that as well, where the political parties came to us and said, listen, we'd like to expand this here as well. And this is where we went to advocacy, because we took this idea to multiple people, but most importantly, we also took it for scale to the Ministry of Housing and Urban Poverty Alleviation, to the Development Authority there. And there, the Joint Secretary, the Secretary were really taken up by this. In the erstwhile Planning Commission also, they were very taken up, but even with the new government, they were very taken up by this. And they said these principles of Tender Show we are actually going to include into a package, into a scheme, and they called that the Smart Road Scheme. And that got embedded. If you look at the 100-odd smart city proposals that there are, just about every one of them has roads redevelopment project as one of the key projects that they deliver on. And these are structured in the manner of this, on the ground, the subterranean, and all of that according to the Tender Show principles. And in Nagpur, for example, they included in their smart city proposal 700 crores, which were allocated to improving the CBD road networks based on the design principles of Tender Show. The ecosystem too has expanded from that one contractor who had to be handheld at every step of the way to now having several contractors. We now have across the country several design consultants that have mushroomed, several PMCs who are overseeing their smart roads projects as part of their smart cities projects. So it has really scaled. Most important for me, I think, is when I hear communities come and talk about how things have changed. School children walking safely. In our Tender Show Phase 1 package, the pedestrian use and the experience has dramatically improved. People are, behaving in a manner that we expected them to. And so it shows the power of good design. That design can actually influence behavior, user behavior. Parking is now at designated places. People are no longer throwing their garbage in the pits of the trees. Landscape, which was earlier being neglected, slowly you're seeing the sprouts of gardens, actually seeds of change happening where communities are taking ownership. So people are trimming their hedges, watering their plants on that little hedge against the street, which we designed as a barrier against motor scooters kind of jumping onto the footpath and traveling on that. And finally, the investment in redevelopment is huge. Residences are at the very minimum painting their exterior surfaces. People are redoing their commercial buildings. Restaurants are becoming a lot more active in designing their experience with the street and redoing their restaurants after 30 years. Old ones like Chandrika, which is one of the landmarks in Bangalore. They're all redesigning it after the Tender Show projects against their streets. So I come to the key thing. You've already got a sense of the policy changes and the impact on policy. But if I have to give you some policy takeaways, then it would be that urban road redevelopment has opened up a whole new sector with expertise in all the elements opening up across the country, not just in Bangalore. The inclusion and design of RFPs was an important one to make sure that we had design consultants who got engaged in this, as well as the PMCs who ensured the quality and the monitoring of it. The revamping of the tender contract. We did the complete redesign of how the BOQ was to be structured. The tender contracts were designed to be fair in their terms to the contractors, which means that by stretch you could see what they had accomplished and start paying them instead of waiting and having all these murky and opaque processes. We also included maintenance clauses, and these are all part of the standard tender show contracts. And I've seen that it's not just in Bangalore, but it's across the country, and so that's really something good. So a contractor has greater ownership to do quality job because he's in charge of the road 3 years or 5 years or 1 year or 2 years after completion. The integration of the network utilities, this was a big one because if people kept talking about, oh, these are so expensive, tender show roads are really expensive. But think of what we're doing. We're not just doing the municipal's job of relaying the road, the footpaths. We're actually doing 7 additional utilities. So if you totally add up all of this of dig and cut and lay and then dig again, the life cycle cost is a tremendous saving, and look at the quality of life that it gives to its citizens. The less you dig, the better it is. Getting the financial model right, this is still work in progress. We believe that the upfront expenditure, the costs of tender sure and the maintenance of tender sure can actually be done through annuity revenues from providing service providers with these conduits. There's no more digging for them, but if they give you an annuity fee, the telecom providers, for example, if you have 6 of them and they're using your ducts and your space that you have created and the chambers that you've giving access to properties underground, everything clean and neat, I think it's a real win-win. And this is something that we still require some leadership and some progressive government to take this forward, to have the time and then to take it forward. I think the best part for me and the most gratifying is when people come up to me and say, thank me in so many ways and say that you've done such a great job and it's so great to have a tender shore road. I mean, these are some of the testimonials that I have seen. But I do see that people are owning their roads, that communities are hanging out, that children are on the roads more. There are landmarks that we're creating, places, what we call third place spaces in the realm of the road networks, intersections where we're making them pleasant to kind of hang and neighbors to kind of chat, communities to kind of network. I think that all of these are, to me, the most satisfying. And one of the biggest things is there's been no cutting on these roads since they've been completed. So the process works, the traffic moves great, people are happy, pedestrians are happy. It's truly become a road which everybody owns. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you, Nandita. Thank you, ZX's team, for giving me this opportunity to share my thoughts. The speaker earlier, Swati, has set the ball rolling, and I think it's the perfect ground for me to continue with from where she has been talking about setting the systems in place and trying to put it together at much larger scale. For us, I will share with you some issues. I will share some hard realities. I will share some theory. I will share some logic. I will share some simple solutions. And I will share some thoughts for you to take it home. We have been working on this for last almost 2 decades. And this presentation, I always say, is a simple one with simple logic, without any degree. So keeping all the hats away as an architect, urban designer, this presentation is common man, common sense. And we love to give this presentation to politicians, bureaucrats, engineers, citizens, shopkeepers, police, everyone who is a stakeholder on a street and is in the neighborhood. And it has been structured over a period of time. I have a lot to show. So let me share my presentation and get going. So this is creating healthy, hygienic human neighborhoods. That is what is my title of the talk. Currently, we keep talking constantly about cities, and there are various titles that we use: rethinking cities, sustainable cities, resilient cities, livable cities. And today, for last almost 7 years or 6 years, we are talking about smart cities. So what do cities look like? From one end of the pendulum, the city is looking like this, and the other end of the pendulum was this cities like Jaisalmer and Jodhpur, which was in the climate, context, connectivity, and culture. These cities had streets which were shaded, we had courtyard, we had a response to people, material, climate in a very different way. Today, the pendulum is on the other end. So I always keep on saying that the pendulum from the green to the red, we must find some middle path. Neither that was the best, nor where we are moving today needs to be looked at. It is like the meal. We want to be smart. Do we want to be smart with the burger or the pizza? Or in India, we want to be smart with our Indian thali. We wear this kind of a clothing which is suitable to us, which is comfortable, which is with respect to climate. This is the way we dress. This is the way the person on the right dresses because of the climatic conditions. But in Indian environment, today when we want to become smart, are we trying to do this is the big question. Having said that, I think smart is being healthy. And I think the city needs to make healthy choices for healthy citizens. That is what the key is all about. Michael Bloomberg, when he came to India a few years ago, he said these three important points. There is a false choice between the economic development and the environmental quality. It is easy to quantify economic growth, but how do you put a value to 2 more years of life? He also said you need jobs, you need growth, you need a lot of things, but to say that you need them before your health is what is in question. I would say if you are dying, you might look back and say that wasn't a good decision. And the last one was, if you don't focus on the environmental quality of life, you will not be able to fix the economic side. If helping people to live longer, happier lives isn't the purpose of the government, then what it is. Having said that, one has to look at cities which are walkable cities, which reduce blood pressure, hypertension, more walkable neighborhoods, which can reduce diabetes risk, brisk walking, better method than losing weight than going to a gym. As Swati mentioned, roads and streets are 20, she mentioned 20% to 30% of open spaces. I still consider if it is 15 to 20% of the open space, but these are the arteries of the cities. And I think we must address them. This can be compared with the circulation system of the human body. Saved trees give us fresh air, walkable streets give us healthy habits, cycle-friendly streets gives us healthy lifestyle, and a safe neighborhood gives us a healthy body. This is the way our streets look like. Completely mixed. Traffic and traffic. People everywhere, all kinds of mood. One may call it a vibrant space, but one may call it chaotic. Do we need to organize this for the safety of the people is the question. This is Delhi a few years ago under an exercise which was done, death to breath. 7 years ago, everybody saw Delhi's air taking a deadly U-turn. And this is what have been the studies which have been lying there in terms of what streets are doing. And this is the final one, leave Delhi. Recently, in one of the talks, Mr. Ratan Tata mentioned we must re-examine our norms for quality of life. Many of you must have read this by Enrique Peñalosa. A developed country is not a place where poor have cars. It is where the rich use public transport. All this sets the ball rolling. Cities have been taken over by motor vehicles and they need to be returned to the people. This is critical. What kind of a city do you want? A very simple thought process which was put by Dr. Dinesh Mohan of IIT Delhi, where my daughter and grandmother can cross the roads alone in the evening, where I have daily needs within walkable distance from home, where I share space as equal citizens with all others. That is equity of the space in a city, And the last one, the one I am proud of and want to show others of its beauty, quietness, and civility. This is the interesting research by Dr. Carlos Dora. If you look at the slide on top and you consider there are neighborhoods on both the sides, if we have light traffic of 2000 vehicles per day, we have 3 friends and 5.3 acquaintances. If the traffic is moderate, 8,000 vehicles, we have 1.3 friends and 4.1 acquaintances. That is fallen down. And if we have more vehicles, then the friendship has fallen down further and acquaintances reduced further. That clearly shows that more the traffic, more the society gets divided, because you don't want to cross across, walk across and meet each other. Enjoy the car. If you keep on adding lanes, nothing is going to really come through. You will keep on getting more and more. Louis Mumford said, building more roads is like loosening your belt when you are getting fat. So if you plan cities for cars and traffic, you will get cars and traffic. And if you plan cities for people and places, you will get people and places, said Fred Kent. This is a master slide which many one of you have must seen. You have a street and you have so many vehicles. The focus is not on moving people, and not on moving vehicles. The same number of people are in the buses and the same number of people are on the bicycle. This releases the road space and also takes people from one point to another, and also reduces pollution, reduces petrol consumption. So the benefits are win-win. And we always show the politician this slide and say that if you believe in this, let us move ahead. A healthy neighborhood needs safety, shade, and society. This is what we believe. So safety, this is the way our children walk on the streets. This is the way we walk on our streets. Anywhere and everywhere we have pedestrians on the street. And this is the way we cross. We may have foot-over bridges. The foot-over bridges are for the benefit of the car and not for the benefit of the pedestrians. It is making the car move easily, and a pedestrian is forced to climb up 4.5 meters or into a subway which is dark, dingy, and not maybe safe for many people, particularly ladies. You have foot-over bridges with advertisement boards like this to get revenue, and then they are unsafe. If you open this up also at the upper level, people don't climb up 3.5 to 4 meters. They will still be on the ground level. This is a subway in Pune, which was half down and half up the vehicle goes. Extremely successful, open to sky, not repeated anywhere in Pune nor Maharashtra, and I think nowhere in India we have a subway like this. People walk on a continuous surface. You can see this lady despite the width of the footpath over there. People walk like this on a surface which is continuous, which is smooth, and which is convenient. These are hawkers on the street where people have at times much objection, but these are the eyes on the street. These add safety to our street. At the same time, they complement our shopping line on one side of the shop and the other side with the hawkers. But the difference is that the hawker here is facing towards the footpath and not towards the roadside. This is a shot from Mumbai in near Mahim, and that is where a street really starts working. Security cameras around the world, United States, UK, and China, and these are Indian cameras. So people on the street is what the actual security is all about. Next comes the shade. Without trees, that is the temperature. With trees, that is the temperature. So what do? We put tar all around the trees, so the tree over a period of time really collapses. We don't put the curb on the other side and put soft earth there so that the tree sustains over it. This is a design issue. And I'm now going to move slowly and steadily to how design can bring in changes. This is in Coimbatore. Look at the size of the trees, but the tar is all around the trees. And these are the trees in Mumbai, which are part of the footpath, giving shade to the, and these are almost 30, 40 years around independence. This is in Marathi, and it talks about that this is not a stunt. It is the way I have to drive my car after it is parked in open when the temperatures are very high. This is the way we can treat our streets. This is in Portugal. This is in our own Jaipur. And this is an innovative idea in Pune at a junction where when people are waiting at the junction for the red light to become green, they have put a shade on top of it there. So finally, people find solutions, and we as designers have to really be with them. Imagine if trees gave us Wi-Fi, we would all be planting them like crazy. It is a pity they only give us oxygen we breathe. The last point in this is society. So people to intermingle, people to talk, people to meet each other. This is Istiqlal Avenue in Istanbul. This is in US. This is famous Manhattan Square, which has been turned from the Yellow Cab Square to the People's Square. So people need spaces all around to chat, to sit, and street is the best space there. This is a slide which is right from the earlier times. Either you have the newspaper or the mobile. Street becomes very, very critical. And that is the way the space is on the street, where you have the children and the elderly in the same space. And also trees add to this quality of space where people may use the trees for the purpose at times when you don't have space to sit on the footpath maybe. The principles of neighborhood planning over a period of time have remained the same. Look at this one, 10 minutes walk or short bike ride. These are builders' brochures on townships all over the country. And it talks about, imagine your children skipping, hopping, jumping, and going to school every day, walk to work, right of way for pedestrians. So if the builders' brochures are talking about all these principles, our question always has been, if this is the master plan of a township, then why not a neighborhood become walkable, safe, and convenient for the people? This brings us to a study where we compared all these brochures of various townships and we evolved what is called as the project Disha, that is Dasha to Disha. Disha is demonstration of integrated, safe, habitable, affordable solutions for neighborhoods. And how do you change the Dasha? Is by data collection, design, discuss, and demonstrate. And if you bring in this change of simple things like street lighting, garbage, trees, walking, cycling, public transport, handicap, street vendors, and open spaces and public spaces, property values will go up, safety will go up, health goes up, social interaction goes up, and pollution comes down, and fuel consumption also comes down. And this brings us to creating healthy, hygienic, habitable neighborhoods with a qualitative economic and environmental change. Traveling by an 11 number bus is the simplest way to connect communities, either walk or cycle. The component of the streets just now was discussed by Swati. So right from walking to parking, everything has a place on the street and it has to be equitable. The red shows what is the priority today. The green is what should be the priority. So equitable distribution of road space is key because road space at times is limited. In New York, Michael Bloomberg's demonstration is simple. Paint and demonstrate it, try it out, and then you can maybe go for a tender. So this is reorganizing the same space with painting where you create cycle lanes, you create a public space and restrict the number of lanes and maybe narrow the lane widths. The guiding principle for all this is the universal accessibility, which we have been using quite a lot, which helps us create footpaths at one level, which I will demonstrate. The second is creating walkability through universal accessibility norm. Parking, if we can get parking to be the paid parking so that it is restricted over a period of time and it is parallel parking along the street rather than inclined parking to bring in safety. Hawkers and vendors policy to be implemented. So you identify spaces for the hawkers. So they are there on the street, but they are identified and they are given that particular location. The 11 number bus, which I mentioned, and a neighborhood shuttle. Within neighborhood, you can have small shuttles, which can create that kind of a mobility so that people don't move cars all the time. Having said that, we started our journey over a period of 2 decades from two places. First one was Jangli Maharaj Road and FC Road almost 10 years ago or 15 years ago, and 10 years ago, the Aund neighborhood. And this is the stage one in 2009, then 2014 and 2016. The first stage was, we saw this notice board, a billboard, which was put up by a politician saying that beautification of the street by 1 crore. We went to the politician, explained him, if you do it the way we are trying to tell you and create places for the people, you will win the next election. That was very simple statement that we made with the politician. This is at my own house in the drawing room where you can make out who is the politician. The rest others are all the NGO and the local engineers, and we explained them the scheme. Next day, we went and did the simple chalk marking on the street. The tender was already there. Items were already there. We said, doesn't matter, we will go ahead. And we marked this. We had discussions with the people, engineers, police, and we created a set of road which was there, which was the width, which was at one edge. You can see the black band moving from left to right. That is what we kept as it is. And the rest, we created a 14-meter wide public realm with saving all the trees. This was the situation before when we entered. You can see all the trees on the left-hand side. And this is what we created. The contractor and the engineer said, in the tender, we don't have item of seating. We said, do you have brickwork and plaster? They said, yes. They said, let us do it with brick and plaster. And this is the way we did the sitting with brickwork and plaster. It was there for almost 7 to 8 years that it lasted. And we have been now doing this street again. And that is the response we got from the people. And it was only 500 meters. So it is a complete bottom-up approach, not a top-down approach, with the citizens, with the politicians, with the engineers, with the local NGOs. And that is what the response was. The second stage started when we said streets for people, by the people, and we started a workshop, a 5-day workshop with Parisar, the NGO, Sumnet, another NGO, and CEE, along with the PVP College of Architecture. And with architecture college students, we thought that we will expand this to the neighborhood. And this was the neighborhood that we identified. We had discussions with the students, the faculty. We had participation by senior citizens. We had an exhibition on the same street saying that this is the way it should be done. And then finally, after the exhibition, the discussions, we came out with a resolution along with the politician, along with the ward officer and the citizens. And this is where it ended in the second phase by saying, for the people, by the people. Almost 7-8 years passed, and then came the last stage of this particular neighborhood, when came the smart city mission. And we had a dynamic municipal commissioner. He said that let us do something and let us do a quick win project. This is the quick win project brochure on the left hand side, you can see, and this is the brochure that we designed. We said let us have a brochure also which converts into what we are trying to say. Rather than showing the roads which is that wide, let us make it an inclusive brochure. So we had area-based development. We again followed the same policy: people, policy, participation, platform, and above all, patience. And this is the area on which we were working on the extreme right. And these are the 9 streets we picked up. Though we were asked to do only 1 street, we said we will do the complete neighborhood, then only connectivity will be established. So these are 9 streets which were put together. So the policy was designed, discuss, and demonstrate. And the design was based on all the principles that were listed earlier. Services were taken into account, street furniture, signages, material, facade, and the design proposal started to get going. We had 2 alternatives. One alternative, which was the parking on both the sides, you can see on the street at the bottom. And this was the street as it was. So we proposed this as the first alternative. The second alternative was creating half of the street into complete public domain, pedestrian rail, and putting 1 street, 1 way with a loop which was available on the other side. Having said that, the other street was also 2-way, and we went into the strategy to discuss. We took this for public discussions as large as from the public auditorium to the streets. Almost 15 to 20 days were for public discussions and the discussions with politicians. Then the project was launched. We made a model of it, and it was launched by the Honorable Prime Minister. Post that, we did a trial run demonstration to make and convert the left-hand side complete street into a public plaza or a public realm. This was run for 7 days after certain public discussions with the people, taking them into account. And we said, healthy aund, ata aple angan. In Marathi, it means, in English, it means now my courtyard. Healthy aund is the area, now my courtyard. And we created this campaign with a lot of posters. And these were various posters which were put, invitations, Aund taking a U-turn in mobility, 11 number bus, etc., etc., etc. We put in what was called as Udan as a shuttle service in between, so that if I want to go a kilometer or a half a kilometer, I don't have to take out my car, and I have this green, orange, yellow, purple, and red shuttle services available, so that it is like a hop on, hop off service. And we created the signage boards, we created the bus stops, etc. And then we had a trial run for 7 days. And this trial run, this was the response. I will just run the visuals and you will see for yourself what was the response of the people during the trial run. There was an opposition too, because people said if you block this whole road permanently for 365 days, it will be disastrous. But it was all enjoyed by the 8-year-olds to the 80-year-olds. The wheelchairs were back. And with a lot of discussion with everyone, this campaign after 7 days ended. Now what to do? Udan was also put in a place with a different format, and everybody enjoyed this. And the people said that you may do any other project, but don't shut down Udan. And that is where it ended, with the youngsters literally supporting it, but obviously there was little opposition too. When the process of implementation started, the complete pedestrian plaza did not come through. So public discussions, again discussions with the people at large scale, with the police, etc. And now the time came for demonstration. We had the street, we could not implement the complete public realm area, but we tried to take this yellow that you see, which is up to the shop. We asked and convinced the shop owners to give their frontages, and we converted this whole thing into a yellow so that it can become a wide public plaza. And this, what you see at the left and right, the yellow, was extended right up to the shop front. And all the services were taken care of. And then finally, this document was signed by the Honorable Commissioner. I must take the cue from what Swati mentioned there, 3.5 meter and 3.5 meter lane widths. We converted this lane into 3 plus 3, 6, and narrowed it down and channelized. And the Commissioner was with us, and he signed the document, and we started working on this particular view that you have. There were 18 elements we tried to incorporate. And this was the raised pedestrian crossing, a simple thing that the way we have our pedestrian crossing, which leads to accident and death. So we had corbel stone which was put over there. It took us a real human effort to convince the engineers to put this corbel stone over there. And we put the corbel stone to control the speed, and finally it was in place. Median and divider, most of the dividers are made out of concrete. We said they are dangerous. If you hit the concrete divider, it is very, very hazardous. At the same time, there is a shy away space. You don't drive next to the concrete divider. They also don't look good. We said, why can't we have dividers like this? They said, no, it takes time for this to grow. We said, yes, point well taken. But we still went ahead and demonstrated this to them. And we said that we will put a mesh in between so that before the green happens, this will be taken care of. So this is the way we implemented the divider. This is the way it grew over a period of time. And this is the image which was in the lockdown period. Obviously, it has been trimmed now, but during the lockdown, early May and March and April, this was how the divider looked. Bollards, simple bollards of stainless steel. They are cut away and sold in the market. So concrete bollards were the solution. So we put in concrete bollards, and this is the first time in Pune that concrete bollards were put. These are very common in Delhi, and I'm sure in Bangalore too. Tree gatings, which we see all around the world when we travel. Everybody, each engineer has traveled all around the world. You know, he has been to Amsterdam, he has been to Tokyo, he has been to Singapore, he has been everywhere. And they have seen it. But this is the state of affairs of our trees on our streets. We said simple gratings, and why can't we do it and manufacture it? And that is where it is. And these gratings have now become common in the streets that we are designing. Sitting, we have these kind of varied heights, and there is no space for the tree to breathe, you know. Each tree needs space to breathe. But when we started designing this, there was a huge opposition saying that you can't give wide sit-outs. This is the kind of sit-outs that we did. And we said that we want to do it in stone. They said, no, stone is not possible nowadays. This material is not available. There are no karigars available, etc., etc., etc. Still, we created this. We said there should be a lot of space along the trees. And that is how we created space for trees to breathe. And that is how it has happened. It is in place. And this is what the ambience of the street looks like when this was implemented for 1 kilometer. And that's the way the sitting comes to. That's the way the pedestrian realm comes. Feeder pillar. Feeder pillars, look like this. We said we will change them. We will put a perforated sheet around it, paint the perforated sheet, and create this into an artwork. And that's how it came through. Parallel parking has been accepted in Pune. We wanted to get this electronic chip over there so that the parking availability can be coming on your mobiles. This has not happened, but parallel parking for the car in place in exactly 2 meters is in place in this street, and that is how it looks. Cycle lane is a painted lane. There are 3 types of paints that can be used in India, but there is always a problem because of weathering, hot paint, cold paint, and powder coated paint. But this paint has lasted over a period of time. We could not give dedicated cycle lane. So basically the paint is like a zebra crossing where you have warning that the cyclists are there. And the cycle was also put in and it was quite successful. Entry and exits at the same level. You can see there is up and down, which is there normally in all the cases. This is here at the same level. And dustbins at the soft areas which we created so that you don't dig and put a dustbin anywhere on the footpath. So at the turning, we have these soft areas. Signage is also in the soft areas there. Universal accessibility was the biggest boon because we used this act to the best of the possibility, trying to get the footpath at one level and getting the wheelchair back onto it. It also helped us create that opening in between from where the handicap can move and then the luggage trolleys. And this is the way the luggage trolley moves now into this realm of our neighborhood where we have been able to construct the footpath. And the last but not the least is that pram which has been there. To see the prams back onto the street because the street is at one level is really heartening. Lighting, when we were creating this, the local corporator said that if you are going to make such wide streets, there will be all darkness there and it will create problems. We said, don't worry, we will give good lighting conditions. And that is how the lighting was. We also put in art and sculpture. These sculptures were installed by Pune Binale Foundation. They have done these sculptures during the Pune Binale. They were all transported and put onto the street as a part of the smart city mission street, which is there. We put in also these games, the snakes and ladders in front of the game shop, and that is how it has been used. Yes, the colors have faded over time, but these are all the officers from one of the corporations from Mumbai who had come. They were also enjoying the same things. Whether it is children or elderly, everybody was part of the street. Know your trees. This street had some 40 different species of trees. And we created this network saying that we would put these signages there so it becomes almost like a botany class. If a husband has gone inside, the children, the child, or somebody can look at it. And this, while walking, you can identify all the trees. Urban lounge is a toilet. Our toilets are put bang onto the footpath, and we thought that that should be completely avoided. So we designed a sleek foot toilet. This has not come through as yet. Hopefully, in the next phase, this will be built. The urban toilet with a clock and bus stops. Again, trying to put bus stops which are on the street, but walkability is ensured. That is the way we design our bus stops. Urban design was trying to get the gates in order, trying to get the signages in order. We could not manage the signages, but we were able to work on the gates. We tried to put a universal signage all throughout, trying to paint the gates black because these black gates, they wanted to remove and throw it and come out with new gates. We said we should not do that and let us get some uniform solution. And this is the way the gates were done. Street ambience looks like this. Young and the old use these streets, and this is now expanding onto 6 kilometers. And this is before and after, which will tell you the true picture of how it was before and how it is now. Look at the footpath, look at the gates, look at the way the tree is. You can correlate with blackberry that the same tree is taken care. Look at this lady walking on the road. Now everybody walks on the footpath over here. These are the trees there. This was the boundary. We could get this boundary shifted and create this kind of a space for people. This becomes this. So the wide footpath, trying to take the frontage from the shopkeepers. Earlier, the shopkeepers were very hesitant. Now they are extremely happy because the people are able to walk into their shops directly. We now call it actually the Aund Mall below the tree canopy. This is the Smart City Mission Ministry people from Delhi, right from the Urban Development Secretary and the Pune Municipal Commissioner visiting and trying to look at it. This is the team of the corporation. I must say that it was difficult to work at times with engineers, but it was extremely heartening to see that we could turn them around to get this project going. And these are the workers who work very hard. I always say that doing the edge of the street is like doing an embroidery. And if the workers are not with you, you cannot get this kind of a finish. The contractor is interested in putting the services and then the concrete in the center. But the edge, which is Kashmiri embroidery, takes a lot of time, a lot of patience, a lot of craft. And we were able to do this with my own team, office team being there 24 hours on the site, though it was not part of our contract. But we put it because we wanted to do it. This is what some people who would say. This is Kunal Kumar. Streets are important public spaces and that should be designed to respond to the various functions that they host beyond being mere conduits of vehicle. This is Paul Barter talking about let us seize the chance for parking success without excuses. And this is very, very important. This is shared with us by Shreya Gadapalli of ITDP. Here is an IAS officer saying, I used to think those who ask for footpaths and buses and control parking were foolish. Today, I have realized that I was foolish, not them. I now know what I must go back and do. This is the IAS officer at one of the training programs at the IAS Training Academy where Shreya Gadapalli presented. So I think the change is happening with a lot of things happening all around in each cities, the way you saw what TENDER S.U.R.E has done over a period of time. But this is a long, long, long journey. And many people have to join this journey. So this is the public outreach. This is the people's feedback. And this is, we were honored to have been graced by the masters on the earlier public realm that we designed and the current public realm that we have designed. The ITI road, which has been redone by us, the plaster sitting has been now converted into the stone sitting. You can see the central one is the plaster sitting 8 to 9 years ago, but it got weared off. And now it is a stone sitting with more permanency. But we started with the chalk marking years ago, 10 years ago. It still continues with that kind of a marking under the supervision of the politician there. And I think the politicians, I feel at times extremely comfortable to work with because if they see that this is in the interest of the people, they are absolutely with you. And they will go all the way to support this project. And we have been lucky to get these kind of politicians, engineers, and bureaucrats who supported this. And this is the way the street looks today. And this is the wall which we are asked to paint. And the politician, I was virtually saying that we will not do this wall painting. This is not our job. Get some artist and do. He said, whether you want to do it or not, Mr. Desai, you are just ignoring my calls. So if you don't give us designs within 2-3 days, we will paint it the way we want. Then we just did some study and we just gave them. And this is the way people started using this street. So that is how the family time, and that is how people are using whatever wall paintings we did. We never thought that this would be used by people like this. That is the ambience today. That is gym on the street. This is again with the politician. He got these 30 equipment and he said, I want to put it on the street. But at least he asked us where to put. We gave him a plan. We said, okay, we will put only 20. He said, no, you have to put all 30, otherwise I will fix it my way. So we succumbed. We gave him these 30 locations. We designed them in a group. And that's how the gym is in use. Again, sculptures on the street. And this is what it shows. The left-hand side, this was actually a video which we are unable to run. The left-hand side, it shows the same person at a realm where the footpath is not at one level and he is finding difficult to take it onto the other side, where on the other side, he is at the same level trying to take his kid with this kind of a trawler. We are doing this in PCMC, Pune Pimpri Chinswad Corporation. And here also the sidewalks have started becoming like this. The bollards have come in. The sittings are in a different manner there. The soft areas to percolate rain. This is further detailed out where the tactile goes on top of the manhole. The tree gratings have got modified a little further. And I firmly believe that to create healthy hygiene human neighborhoods can only happen when we start designing beyond the boundary with people participatory approach. And this is the journey that we have right from Satara Road, where we started some almost 15 years ago. And these are all the grids of the projects that we have been doing till today, that we are doing the last mile connectivity for the Pune Metro. We are doing SV Road in Mumbai. We are doing some work in PCMC, and it is moving on. And the journey continues. And I have this saying that the depth of the democracy is decided by the width of the footpath in a city. And this is supported by, and yes, Swati also mentioned this, design leads and guides us all. So this is an old photograph. This is one of our early projects at Satara Road, where we designed the footpath as per the human desire line, as we call it. And the people, whether educated or illiterate, they exactly use the footpath the way we had designed. This is our strong team of office whose contribution over last 15 years has made it all possible, right from the trainees to the architects to the urban designers. And that is our connect. Thank you very much for the patient hearing, and sorry if I have overshot the time because I didn't have my clock with me. Thank you very much.
Good evening, everyone. I am here and very honored to be here. First of all, I would like to thank the Charles Correa Foundation for giving me the invitation. Special thanks to Nandita for making this happen. I am honored, as I said, to be joining such a remarkable panel. I want to open my presentation today just by acknowledging a great loss from last night for the US and for the world, I would argue. Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg passed away last night from cancer complications. As the second ever justice on the Supreme Court of the United States, I drew a lot of inspiration from Justice Bader Ginsburg. And it is a great loss to not have her on the bench fighting for justice and for gender equality. My presentation today is dedicated to her and the vast legacy she left behind. Could we please switch on to the slides? Fantastic. Before we move into the presentation, there's one thing I want to acknowledge, that a lot of ideas that I'll be sharing today might actually resonate with many of you as something we already know how to do. They're not novel ideas, in my opinion, especially after Prasanna's presentation. You'll see that to people in India and communities in India, placemaking comes naturally to us. My intent is to demonstrate the importance of being a placemaker and the importance of preserving what we already know as we continue to grow and evolve as a society. So what is placemaking then? It's a buzzword, it's become a buzzword. And as with any buzzword, the definition of placemaking can get lost sometimes. So let's look first as what placemaking means. It's essentially a combination of two words, place and making. The word make is relatively easy to understand. You're creating something, it's an action. Place, however, is a little bit more complicated. It is a socio-psychological concept that lives in people's hearts and minds. So how does that translate in city building and creation of public spaces? Well, a place is a space, which is an entity we can measure. It's either a physical space or a virtual space, but something has dimensions to it. Place is when we layer on a meaning on top of space. So think about the last time we used the word place. The last time I used the word place, I was actually talking about the neighborhood I live in New York City and how it is a place for culinary experiences, for a variety of food. I was using the word place with a description with it. I was using it with a meaning attached to it. So place, in essence, to really simplify it, bring it really, really down, is space plus meaning. It has a story that is in my mind. It's a story of my own that's attached to it. This is a really great example I like to use in terms of demonstrating what place means. So if you look at this photograph, this is something Fred Kent, the founder of Project for Public Spaces, used to show a lot. If you look at this picture and everybody who's in that picture, they're having a slightly different experience, whether they're looking at the atmosphere through sunglasses or without sunglasses, whether they're looking left or right, whether they're enjoying ice cream or not enjoying ice cream, everybody's having a slightly different experience. And based on the experience that they're having, they're creating a slightly different story in their mind, which means they're creating a slightly different meaning in their mind for the same space. They're all sitting on the same bench, but their place story is different from one another. Similarly, on this bench, you'll see that it's the same bench in the same location. Everybody's doing something different. They're either looking somewhere different, either they are talking to somebody else, or they're sitting alone, or they're sitting in two different levels. You know, the person who's sitting on the ground and the person who's sitting on the bench, everybody is having a slightly different experience, slightly different story, and a slightly different meaning of what this place is to them. And all of that is created by what you're doing, what you're seeing. So place then is essentially lives in the minds and hearts of people who actually use it. So it's all about the person. And to underline what Prasanna was saying, place is all about the user and place is all about the community. So this is to really drive home the point of how place is created. Well, it's created by the people who use it. I came upon this definition of place through a little bit of a loss. And this is not a fancy place, but I wanted to share a little story here. I am a trained architect. I'm born and raised in India, and my parents, in fact, and my family is on the presentation today. When I moved to the United States, right before moving to the United States, I was working as an architect in Hauskas. And we had this little DDA shopping plaza very close to our office where all of us, you know, young architects, right after being done at work, will automatically go to this plaza. This is during COVID, so all the shops are shut down, but you can imagine what it looks like when the shops are not shut down. So all of us will automatically after work go to this plaza. We'll sit there. There was a guy who would sell momos on a corner. We would buy momos and a cup of coffee and we'll sit there for hours. We would run into other people that we knew. We had a running account with the Momo person. You know, we would give him certain amount of money and keep buying momos for weeks after weeks. And then we would gather there every evening. And then we'll automatically disperse at the end of the evening when all of us would go home. It was such an important experience. And I didn't realize what it was till I moved to the US. And I actually moved to a very car-dominated place of the US in Texas. And I started to realize that what I missed most about Hauskas was this place. And I realized that it was, in fact, my third place. And the reason it was so important to me was because of those memories of hanging out with all of my friends, making deep memories and running into other people. And that meaning was what made it really important to me. And that's how I discovered place through loss, and I discovered the field of placemaking through loss. So what is placemaking then? We understand what place is. It's creating spaces that have meanings to it. Placemaking is then a deliberate act. It's a collaborative visioning process to help public spaces better serve their communities through programming, design, and stewardship. As I said, it is a deliberate process which is designed to help people create their own memories for the places that they would encounter. I work at Project for Public Spaces, as I said, and we've been around for more than 40 years. And after working with public spaces for that many years, we do have an idea of what the ingredients of a great place look like. Again, these are just ingredients, not a recipe, because a recipe is unique to every community. The ingredients are, however, clustered into these 4 categories. Like, first and foremost, why would you go anywhere if there was nothing there for you to do? So uses, activities, destinations and attractions are very important to making a place great. You know, you would need something that you can do in that particular public space to go there. The second thing is comfort and image. Let's think about us as human species. People tend to leave a situation, a conversation, a relationship, whatever you can think of, as soon as they feel uncomfortable. So if we want people to stay in public spaces, we have to think about what is it that makes them comfortable? What is it that makes them create a positive image for the space and fold that into our recipe for a public space? How would you get to a place if there wasn't access. If there wasn't convenient, safe, easy access, how would you even get to that public space? So access and linkage is absolutely crucial, and not just physical access in your mind, you feeling that you can go to this place and you're welcome, this place is for you, but also visual access. Are there cues that you can tell where a public space is? And for people who don't have the ability of sight, other ways in which they interact with their city, is there access for them? And finally, to create that meaning in those stories, is this public space sociable? Is this where you're going to run into people you already know? Is this the place where you're going to make new friends? Is this the place where you can have a conversation with somebody, even if it's buying a cup of coffee and saying hello, or as I said about my place, having a running account with the Momo person at the DDA complex. So what is it that makes that place sociable that you can fold in to make it a really great public space? So folding into that whole idea of place, now we have to make it an applied process, something that we can practice. I'm sure that many of you have heard about the concept of human-centered design. It's a process that starts with the people you're designing for and ends with new solutions that are tailored particularly to the needs of the users. So it begins and ends with the user. And the user is looked at as a partner throughout the process, not somebody who's consuming the things that you're creating. So the people who go to these public spaces are actually your partners, not receiving some service from you. So what it does in essence is it shifts power from the creator to the user. It tries to sort of even that playing field and create more equal power. This process is slightly sort of easier to understand when we think about products. If we're creating a particular product that caters to a particular demographic, your user is clear. You go to them, you ask them what it is that they want, and then you create a product that responds to what people want. Market research and user research is very common in the design of products. But when it comes to our cities, that's a really, really complicated product. Cities and public spaces by the very concept are supposed to be for everyone equally. But what we have known for a while now, and now more than ever living through COVID, racial uprisings around the world, and recurring climate events, is that our cities are not equal. Power is not held equally. The ways in which our cities support our health and well-being vary significantly along the lines of culture, race, gender, religion, and other aspects of our socioeconomic status. And that is true everywhere. This is not just India or the United States, it's everywhere. What we've seen from data here in the US is COVID has been very unequal, and all the other climate events that's been happening, where the fires are going in California and other hurricanes, people with lower socioeconomic statuses and classes are impacted very, very differently. So our cities, in fact, are not equal at all. So without deliberate action, we continue to perpetuate the same status quo, where people with more power and representation already get a bigger representation in our public spaces. So I love this graphic a lot, because what you see here is it shows you the tree is the system. And if people on the left, people who already have access and power, will continue to get more access and power and more apples till the time that the system is in fact tilted in one side. What I try to do in the work that I do is focus towards more equity and then eventually justice, where we actually start to shift the power, start to shift the access, and give the person with less access a taller ladder. So they have, now finally equal access to the apples. But then justice, what that really looks like is to actually tilt the public realm and tilt the system to actually, now give people equal access. So I'll give an example of that in our public spaces. If you capture a photo of a public space in any of my cities that I'm familiar with in India, there are still more men than women using public spaces. And it's not because women don't want to, it's because public spaces aren't created for them. They aren't suitable for them. So there is that huge inequity that I spoke about. Similarly, in the US, if you capture a photo of a busy park in a downtown, or more prominently, a suburban retail center, you'll either see dominance of one socioeconomic class, or you'll see separate clusters of people in their own realm. So the world is not equal. And in order to make it equal, we have to look at it from the lens of equity, and we have to practice a method to get to justice. Okay, so how do we do that then? How do we do this sort of intentional process with an equity mindset, with a justice mindset, and start to shift the dynamic a little bit? The way that I think about that is I always begin with a priority audience. No matter what kind of public space I'm looking at, I first begin with that neighborhood and who's the priority audience. And priority is created by multiple levels of marginalization and multiple levels of vulnerability. So in my mind, I always begin with, what about a little girl from a low-income neighborhood who is marginalized and vulnerable based on her gender, based on her age, based on her socioeconomic status. And these layers of vulnerability make that little girl my priority audience. And it's a topic very close to my heart. I have a young niece, and they live in Delhi, and it's a topic that's been very, very close to my heart because I care about the health and well-being of people who are the most marginalized in our cities. So once we identify that priority audience, the next step is really to plot the ecosystem of stakeholders around them, because our lives are not created by just us. There are lots of factors that play into how our lives come to be, including caregivers for that little girl, community leaders, service providers, people who provide retail, shop owners, entrepreneurs, the education agencies, the health agencies, policymakers, planners and designers, public officials. Everybody has a role and is part of the ecosystem of stakeholders around that priority audience. And once we've identified both of those, the next step then really is, so we did the top part. We defined the neighborhood and we defined who the priority stakeholders are. The next step really is to evaluate the space and identify the assets and issues with the priority audience and with the stakeholders. So the people who will be using this public space, that little girl and her family and the members of the ecosystem, really go to a public space with them and evaluate what are the assets, what's working, and then talk about what's not working. Once we do that, the next step really is to think about what is the joint vision with this stakeholder group. How do they want their public spaces to change? How do they want their streets to change? And start to bring them into the conversation. And there are lots of ways that can be done, from sort of very human ways, in-person conversations, workshops where, we have representation and where we actually allow people to share their ideas freely, start to create, again, a vision from them. And other simple ways here, what you see is, by giving people some ideas and letting them vote on those ideas. So you see, again, my priority audience, you see little girls voting on the kinds of things that they would like to do in their public spaces and really understanding what it is that people want to do in those public spaces. So with that knowledge, to really create a vision for what that place looks like. And this vision can take multiple forms. It can be a 2-line sentence of how we want our park, public space, street to change, or it can be something a little bit more complicated where, people like us with training in architecture and design can start to put layers to it. This is a project that my organization worked in right alongside Harvard University, where there was a space that acted as a divider between the university and the community in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And the vision, again, as you see, is very simple. It shows glimpses of photographs and inspiration from other places of what different spaces within that area could actually look like. So simple things, not rocket science. And what those visions do is, once we have an idea from the community, what they want, we can start to use that vision as a tool for advocacy, to bring together a lot of the other stakeholders and agencies who actually control the public realm in some way, shape, or form, and can actually help you make that vision come to a reality. So the vision, again, as I said, is a strong advocacy tool with which to start to bring people together to do something. And Prasanna already shared ideas of how to do things like the lighter, quicker, cheaper, or tactical method. So that's exactly what happened in case of Harvard. Was what you see here was quick implementation of ideas that people had shared, not major capital improvements or changes at this point, but really creating activities that show people what a sort of more developed and improved upon public space could look like, and whether or not the ideas people mentioned, the things that they said they like, whether or not they'll actually like them when they became live. So similarly here, you see a big chessboard on the left. I actually have visited that chessboard several times with their little kids playing there, and they totally ignore a fancy playground 1 block down. So again, start to test these ideas and bring people together to see whether or not they work. And this is not a kind of a school of thought that only works at the sort of people level, the human scale. This has to be kept in mind at every scale. As Swati mentioned, scale cannot occur without government allowing for that kind of work and for there being a policy framework and other things that allow you to actually scale things. So when we're at the systems level, we cannot ignore how we want the human scale to work and infuse that really into at all scales of city design so we can make that a reality. Policy can really be a barrier or an enabler. So we really have to think about the multiple scales at which this needs to happen. This is the second quotation, I guess, showing up from Fred Kent today. So what Fred really says is that we have to turn everything upside down to get us right side up. So again, not thinking about the user as somebody who receives the public space and receives the benefit, but the user who's a partner in how we actually create this. There are several facilitators and inhibitors to this. I already said, policy can be a huge either enabler or inhibitor. So things that can enable placemaking are enabling policies. And then master interpreters. Interpreters are people who are planners, architects, designers, engineers, who actually think this way and who can interpret the policy in a human-centered manner. And then again, human-centered design policies at the very ground level. The things that can stand in the way are inflexible policies or a complete lack of policies that allow for citizen engagement. And the third thing that can stand in the way of reactionary opposition. Like if you define the problem for people and create a solution for people, there definitely are going to be some people who would say, why are you changing my street again? Like what was wrong with it? I liked it before, don't change it. So the people who then become opposition, if they're not consulted from the very beginning, become inhibitors in the process too. I would like to give shout outs to a couple of publications that I like to reference to. There are all these sort of design manuals and highway design manuals that can stand in the way of making change, but there is a growing number of manuals that can actually help us do citizen-led change. And I would direct people to two of these. There are lots of resources on Project for Public Spaces website as well, if you would like to reference those. There are several benefits of taking this sort of human-centered approach to our public spaces, of being a placemaker. First and foremost, it allows us to create a sense of comfort and promote a sense of comfort, promote a sense of place, because we've actually taken the time and taken the pains to talk to people. But at the same time, it helps us improve accessibility because that was a focus. It helps us build support for a local economy because we've taken the time to understand the local assets. It helps us foster social interaction because that was an identified outcome that we wanted to. And it helps us promote health, more importantly, not just physical health, but social and psychological health. And it continues to define a sense of place and community for the people who actually will create that sense of community. So with all that background of placemaking and sort of citizen-led work, why does Project for Public Spaces care about streets? Why is it important to us? Well, it's very important because I actually intentionally put a patch over the name of the town that this map is from, because the location is not important. What's important is, this is how we often think about our cities. We think about our cities as clusters of different types of land uses that, in the middle is where I'm going to put the downtown, where everybody will go work. Orange is where some people would live. Yellow is where some other people would live. And we try to sort of create a city from a 30,000 foot view, like the bird's eye view. We try to create a city and we try to place all these things, which are actually components of our daily life, things that we need to visit on a daily basis as somebody who lives in this city. So once we create these tiny pockets, these silos of activities, what we have to then do is to connect them. Right? Like we have to create these streets and networks that actually connect all those different land uses. Now we have to be very careful what modes and behaviors do we consider supreme, because the behaviors and modes that we choose to prioritize on our streets demonstrate the behaviors we choose to prioritize in our cities. So the width of the sidewalk and activities on the sidewalk shows what the politicians' priorities are. This is exactly what I'm talking about here. So if we prioritize the automobile and every little pocket, every little bubble has to be connected with that for the car, this is what our cities look like. Like some people would say, this is actually really beautiful. It's a photograph, it shows on people's backgrounds and, you're Facebook profile pictures from Dubai and Houston and wherever have you. We take pride in this kind of photograph. But what that does is, on a human scale, all our resources that we have to invest in public spaces get stretched out. This is what that street looks like on a human scale, where if we were to think about those meanings to create a place, there's only one kind of behavior you can do here. You can drive past it really, really fast. There's only one kind of story you can create here. Everything else cannot be done. This is not where you go and play cricket. This is not where a very sort of spontaneous gathering of two neighbors occurs. This is a place where one thing and one thing only happens, because that is what we prioritize. We prioritize connectivity through an automobile, and that takes a lot of space. So if we had the choice, would we rather do that or would we do this? A street that clearly looks like, if you were to walk past the street, you can at least have 10 different experiences and 10 different stories. Or one from Delhi, same thing. You know, it doesn't have to look fancy for us to create memories and for us to actually think that a place is in fact a place is in fact a positive experience. And what happens when we actually prioritize that car, you know, a thing that takes so much space, and then all our activities are happening in bubbles and we have to connect them? What happens is, the moment we start accommodating the vehicle into our daily lives. This is a map of Houston, Texas, and thanks to the old urbanist, a blogger, they've actually plotted out every space that is now given to either movement or storage of automobiles. So you can see in the red, that's all space that in some way caters to a thing that connects you. And the end result is that not 15%, not 20%, 64.7% of the public space is given over to either roads or off-street parking. So what do we have left to create all the rest of the experiences? What do we have left? Well, not very much. And people a lot of times associate public space with parks. Parks are only 2.6% of what you see here, which is very, very little. So what happened to our public realm? Where did our public realm go? So what's important for us to recognize, actually, I'm going to go back. What's important for us to recognize here is that streets are the biggest chunk of our public spaces. And in many parts of the world, people have actually forgotten that all our transportation infrastructure is in fact public space. So I am kind of pointing out the United States as a cautionary tale, and Houston, a city designed for the car. This is what's happened. And it's not just a space catastrophe that we don't have space left in the public realm to do anything else. It's also a climate catastrophe. What you see here is that even when we think about connecting people and, you know, the different types of modes that we need to use to connect people, the weight does not rest equally between all different modes. Road-based transportation is the biggest chunk of carbon emissions in this country and the world, really. And it's not just about people driving cars, it's also about the goods that we use, the food that we eat, and everything else, and how that travels on the road too. There's very little rail-based freight in this country. So road-based transportation of materials and goods is also very, very expensive. And then even if the cars are clean, the manufacturing of cars and the manufacturing of roads, the embedded carbon in all the other sort of tools that we need to actually get around on roadways is very, very high as well. So not all pollution can be seen. The air in Houston may look clean, but the per capita footprint is about 4 times that of the per capita footprint, carbon footprint in Delhi. There are lots of other sort of negative aspects of this. But again, the carbon footprint demonstrated here is, you know, United States being a country much smaller in population than India, bigger in area, but smaller in population, is still much bigger of a contributor to carbon footprint in the world. And that, again, goes to show what transferring to a road-based transportation system has done and how it is an impending climate catastrophe. So when we celebrate things like that, I saw this in the newspaper a few months ago, we have to really think hard about what do we consider an achievement and what are the burdens of some of these achievements that we inevitably lay on the communities where things like this happen. It's not just about connectivity, it's also about connectivity how. And it's up to us to really think about whether this is the kind of future that we want, or we want all the other things that should be happening in our public spaces for us to be able to continue to placemake, thrive our economies, have social health, run into people. Is this the better use of our public space, or this? What it is that we want to prioritize, what type of behavior are we allowing on our streets is very, very important. And I only mentioned two kind of negative aspects of automobile-based transportation, namely the giving up all our public space to it and climate, but there are lots of other things to be thinking about. For example, deaths on the roadway, and children are disproportionately affected by that. We already know the antidote to that. If we know that a lot of people die on our roads every year, then we have an antidote to that. It's thinking about roadways for this. It's thinking about roadways for safety, for human behavior, and other things. And then if we do that, if we do think about streets for people, people do run into each other. One of the things that Project for Public Spaces really, really likes to do is capture all the photographs of when we see people running into each other on a street. They didn't know. This was one my colleague captured, where literally two people were like walking from the other sides of the street and they saw each other and they stopped to actually hug in the middle of the street. I've seen that multiple times, but that is the kind of street that we want, and that is the kind of street that we deserve. So if we continue to make decisions about land uses and zoning from like 30,000 foot above, it becomes that every street will have only one role, and that would be to connect these land uses. And because of our fraught systems, automobiles will continue to get supremacy unless we start to think about the ways in Swati said, or the ways in Prasanna just pointed out. So we have to think about our streets as public space. That's what it is. And we have to layer in all the elements. All of these ingredients should be able to find a place in our street. As somebody, I grew up playing on my street, and now my nephew and niece play on the street. This work is very important to me. And we haven't, Indians haven't yet completely forgotten what streets are like. We haven't completely forgotten it. Our priorities might be slightly misaligned, but we haven't forgotten. Many of us still play in the street and hold fond memories. It's important for us to keep it that way. So I want to quickly go through sort of, 10 bullet points of how we can start to think about streets as places. Well, first and foremost, as I said, I started with equity. So we have to design for equity. We have to think about whose life gets most impacted by decisions we make for our streets, and who gets the least representation. We have to bring them front and center, and they have to become our priority audiences. We have to really protect the sense of comfort for our priority audiences. One of the things that we've learned here through the racial uprising recently is that security cameras don't make everybody feel the same way. Black and brown people in the United States have a very different idea of policing and idea of comfort than white people. So all of those things really have to be folded in. And then we have to foster attractions and destinations for our priority audience, not a hypothetical audience, but our priority users. We have to think about what is their identity, what culture do they come from, what race, what class, and how can we make their public space feel like it is for them and reflect that identity? How can we have active and connected edge uses? Because again, if we didn't have those eyes on the street and things looking onto the street, then why would you go to a street? It will not allow for multiple experiences. So we have to think about connected edge uses and bursting that silo between land use and street use. We have to deliberately create opportunities for lingering. What makes people pause and what makes people stay? How can we actually make sure that we give them those things, whether that is through putting benches around the trees that we looked at in the previous presentation, or maybe it's because of the chess game or other things that we put in there. How do we really create these opportunities for lingering for people? How does it get managed? Because if a street is not cleaned, not maintained, nobody's looking after it, good management is a really crucial part of streets as places. I would also say democratic management is a very important way. How do we give the control and responsibility, accountability back a little bit to the citizens so they can become part of the management infrastructure? And how do we plan for flexibility? As I said, us Indians already know how to be a placemaker. Way before the term tactical urbanism was popularized, we had the term jugaad. And that was a thing. How do we really plan for people to take ownership of their public space and really start to create their own experiences and allow them to experiment, because we can inhibit them through policy, but how do we allow them to experiment in their public realm, and to always think about a balancing of modes. No one thing should have supremacy over our streets. I see this happening, traveling between Houston and Delhi every year. I see where we're headed, and we really need to pause and think about how do we create opportunities for people to safely walk? How do we create opportunities for people to do anything except automobile? If we don't want them to get in an automobile, we have to give them a respectable other option, and that's important. So the last thing I have here is I'm gonna have the AV team play a little video to really drive home the point of how I think about a street, how Project for Public Spaces thinks about a street. So AV team, take it away. So thank you so much one more time to the Charles Correa Foundation. I just want to share that every time I see that video, I do tear up a little bit because this is just my call to everybody. I grew up playing on the street. I think of the street as a very, very important part of our city, and our kids and the future generations deserve to have a street that is their public realm, deserve to have a street that does more than create spaces for automobiles. Thank you so much.
So hello to everyone. Can you hear me okay? Everything's good on this end. Okay, so hello to everyone tuning in virtually. I hope you're all healthy and safe. I know we're all in many different places, and we have roughly about 350 people who have attended for the past few hours. I want to thank Nandita and the Charles Correa Foundation for inviting me to participate in this very stimulating session alongside such distinguished panelists. It's really been a pleasure to listen to the three of you speak this evening. Thank you to the Z-Axis Help Desk team for keeping us connected so we can focus on the conversation. I know that's not an easy feat, and we've had a few blips before we started, so great work there. And perhaps most importantly, thank you to Swati, Prasanna, and Nidhi for your insightful presentations. It's wonderful to have this opportunity to reflect together on your work and to provoke some thoughtful discussion. So Nandita opened today's session on streets in the neighborhood by focusing our attention on the nature and development of urban neighborhoods through linkages, and on investigating ways in which streets can become more accessible and practical to residents in surrounding neighborhoods. Through these three presentations, we're reminded that streets are many-faceted, and that they are spaces in which our collective beliefs, needs, desires, and power relations interact, sometimes in emancipatory ways, but more often in restrictive ones. Building upon the previous three Z-axis sessions, we have today investigated streets in the context of neighborhoods in which they provide an armature for the theater of everyday life. Through our plans, we know that the street is a static infrastructural space, and yet it is also one our ears quickly identify as transmutable due to the constant din of projects outside of our windows. Projects for roads being built, operated and maintained for a few years, maybe a decade, until the project cycle starts again. With the return of everyday life, these roads projects become neighborhood spaces of streets, a shift that is seamless in Indian cities. As Swati stated in the TENDER S.U.R.E case study earlier this evening, the road is a network which impacts our quality of life. The transition from a roads project to the everyday life of streets is further complicated by uncoordinated maintenance on aligned trunk infrastructures such as water, sanitation, energy, and communications projects. And if we're lucky, perhaps landscape projects too. That's something all three of you have touched on in your presentations. The street is also a governance space in which authority, cultures of decision-making, investment are negotiated and contested daily. Infrastructure life cycles and the long-term success of projects is never guaranteed, something all of us know as practitioners. In the book Mega Projects and Risk, the economic geographer Ben Flipberg lists the perennial assumptions that accompany complex infrastructure projects. First, that they would go according to plan with no delays. Second, that no changes would occur in performance specifications. Third, that there would be no management problems. Fourth, no problems with contractual arrangements. Or fifth, of no new technologies or geology, and no major conflicts, and no political promises that are not kept. We know that in all of our years of practice that none of these assumptions have kind of played out to be true, and that all of them end up having a bit more complexity to them over the implementation of projects and in the life after. At the center of the governance space, state and market-led approaches can struggle to include and learn from diverse stakeholders who hold conflicting beliefs and aspirations. Promises for high performance can vanish in a vacuum of no feedback loops, and no accountability. Stretched capital plans and poorly managed maintenance budgets can quickly lead to long-term failure for expensive new streets, parks, and other infrastructure. At the periphery of the governance space, community-led approaches push for deeper participation, accountability, and reform. They also build upon the learning and perseverance of several generations of right to the city movements. But they must also surmount significant challenges of organization, political support, funding, and enforcement, something all three of you have touched on in your recent experiences, and something which some of our questions in a little bit will hopefully dive a little bit more deeply into. Within this context, all three panelists sought opportunities to internalize a systems approach and to bring in the excluded communities back into the project cycle, whether during project identification, during visioning and strategy, or through the technical gauntlet of design development and testing, perhaps during tendering and construction. Once construction is complete and projects enter their long operational life, or what we hope is a long operational life, new opportunities for accessibility and practicality shift. They shift from the visionary and strategic to the tactical everyday of maintenance budgets, new social norms, and temporary uses and programming. Something which Nidhi, you highlighted in the Harvard project, and which I got to see up close for a few years. All three speakers have assessed the context of infrastructural failure and have problematized streets in a way that invites opportunity, new coalitions, and meaningful action. In fact, Swati and Prasanna, your careers over the last several decades have really been witness to some of the changes that have occurred in Indian governance and project making when it comes to streets and the public realm. Nidhi's phrasing of an ecosystem of stakeholders articulates the challenge of defining project stakeholders and of generating shared value. In Swati and Prasanna's cases, coalitions of popular support and political will unlocked project outcomes that might have seemed impossible 5 or 10 years earlier. Prasanna's reframing of smart cities as healthy cities is a useful turn of phrase that helps us reflect on the speed of industrialization and urbanization over the past 150 years and of what we've had to give up in achieving that comfort. In 2020, the scope and speed of infrastructural change still do not meet many people's needs, and it's something we still struggle with today. The COVID-19 experience has highlighted what some of those challenges are, and all three of you, I believe, have had some recent experiences that we can discuss in our provocations a little bit later on. In a conversation last week, Swati rhetorically asked, why can't India have great roads? Her presentation of Jana USP's TENDER S.U.R.E project reveals the endurance required by technical and community advocates in using systemic approaches to respond to wicked problems, all the way from visioning through the quagmires of design feasibility to transparent bidding. From the first project on St. Mark's Road, the TENDER S.U.R.E project demonstrated the value of regularized multimodal streets and utility corridors, but also set a precedent for accountable procurement and quality of construction. These challenges transcend geography. It's something that, in the past several years, we've been working in South Boston to do the exact same project. Perhaps the organizational chart looks a little bit different. The budgets are allocated from different actors, but the problems remain the same. Prasanna discussed case studies in walkability, street upgradation, and socially shared streets to increase the pedestrian and transit rider share of the street section. We learned about challenges in the regularization and modernization of transit, curb management, and last mile connectivity resulting from very widespread outreach. And I think for presentations to bureaucrats in the political class, a seemingly endless toolkit of opportunity that can meet their political needs while improving public life. And Nidhi's presentation focused on placemaking in its spatiality and site for meaning making, in which projects can be defined and developed through public engagement. Opportunity was identified in the enabling regulation and frameworks used in delivering projects, namely through street design guidelines and the centrality of participatory learning through iteration and cogent communication throughout the project development process. Indeed, all three of you have shared one aspect in this regard, whether through public information and engagement or through presentations that appeal to the political class and its line departments, or in our lecture rooms and professional discussions, education, equity, inclusion are key in your arguments. In the first session, Ranjit Hoskate reminded us of Charles Correa's essay, Learning from Ekalavya, in which Correa argues that to be effective, the architect must not only be a specialist, technically trained, perhaps licensed by a professional guild, but also a generalist and an autodidact. In all three of your cases and your arguments, you've argued that the architect should be an autodidact in civics, something that has disappeared from our education from primary school into secondary and graduate level courses. So beginning our provocations, our first one really addresses this disposition of designers and planners as advocates, one which Charles Correa exemplified over his professional life, and the three of you continue to live in yours. In 1965, his contemporary Paul Davidoff argued that, quote, intelligent choice about public policy would be aided if different political, social, and economic interests produced city plans. In your presentations today and in previous writing, you've each proposed that designers and planners should possess the disposition of the advocate and the activist, and to be sensitive to the dynamics coursing through public life. So on behalf of the large number, roughly 350 student attendees today, what guidance can you provide them in terms of what kind of disposition we should mold ourselves into and towards? So we'll start with Swati, but generally for these questions, any of the three of you can jump right in and share as suits you. So if you want to unmute yourselves, you're welcome to respond.
Very quickly to respond to what you talked about, Vineet, I think first of all, thank you for your opening comments. They were very thoughtful. But to respond to your question, and I'm cognizant of the time, Definitely, I think for all the students who are interested in thinking of public life and how, they can, what kind of disposition that they need to make change happen, if that is what they're interested in, um, I think it's just a mindset of both. I think, first of all, you need to know your domain expertise. So you must have technical competence and technical expertise. When you're actually engaging with something which is a problem, then you do need to develop that. And you might not even say that this is a problem that I want to attack today, but to have the disposition to then help you in whatever problems that you want to fix, that some challenges that you feel are germane to you and you want to take charge of and participate in making change towards. First thing is you do need to bring technical competence. And the second is you must have thinking mind, this learning and the doing, what I talked about very early on, that you can't just be a think tank, because then the think tank, you don't really get the nicks and bruises that you get in the learning, in the doing of it. So what Prasanna was talking about, what we learned in TENDER S.U.R.E, you can just kind of end up being a kind of a drafting table or a policy kind of a pusher, where the closest that you've come to conflict is when your computer crashes, and that's not good enough, right? You do need to get into the action. So you need to roll up your sleeves and get your hands dirty. But doing that, it's important to then step out again and rethink it, because solutions are never static, especially when you have a city systems approach, when you know that things keep fluctuating, the wicked problem approach that we're talking about. That requires that you're constantly evaluating, constantly stepping back from your work, evaluating, learning more about it, recognizing more about it, researching more about it, and then coming back again with the second version and the third version and the fourth version. So I think that kind of a disposition is important. Now, either you're actually going to go off and run your own, start your own outfit, which I think if you're doing something like this, you're better off actually engaging with an outfit which is already doing this. So if you can find organizations which do both of it, the think tank that does, which is what we call ourselves, but if you can find somebody who does both ends of the spectrum, that's great. And that's where you should get all your learnings from. But otherwise, engage with both. Do a stint with one, which is a think tank and a policy tank, and the other one, which is a practice tank, which does the work. So that's what I would say. But you need to develop that kind of a disposition. Over to you, Vineet.
Great. So thank you, Swati. I'm gonna, since for the sake of time, I think I am gonna focus the questions on each participant. So I'll just send the second question. So, each of you has developed practices in which you aim to prioritize citizen and community participation as central to working in the public realm. In today's session, we've seen use of public information, consultation, and partnership woven through your case studies. Prasanna, what challenges and opportunities do you see in the future for keeping participation at the center of infrastructure making? And how can we deepen our commitment to it as a larger community of practice of architects, planners, landscape architects?
I think we should keep talking to the people, and there is a huge opportunity. I think people are extremely receptive if we try to tell them in simple words rather than complicated jargons. Our journey has been with the people on the ground, and any meeting, any kind of a interaction with them has been very simple. And I think these weekend meetings with them at any forum where we put obviously we are competent to make plans, we are competent to make certain diagrams, etc., but the thoughts that we ask them always has been that, what do you want? So if it comes from them, then they start having the ownership to it. What happens is that most of the time we have seen is that it is a top-down approach, whereas the bottom-up approach is the best. Most of the projects are already done, the tender is out, and then they are. Currently, we are facing a similar scenario in one of the projects where the tender is out, the work has started. When the work has started, people are up in the arms and they are trying to say, you didn't tell us what you are doing. And for last 15 days, we are trying to convince the people, and we have been able to break the ice because we have taken them into confidence. So I think this whole people's participation process has to begin before. But unfortunately, in the system, this doesn't happen because they want to come out with the tender at the earliest, because they want to say that the work has got going. And people's participation takes little time, and that time needs to be catered for. It needs to be catered for in the whole system. And that is very, very critical. And sometimes that is lacking. And we come out, and when the construction starts, then people are there giving their reactions and input. And that becomes quite difficult. But over a period of time, I think people are realizing that, yes, and politicians in particular are realizing that we must carry people together, because it is win-win for them if the people are with them. And that is the key to it. Whereas the system at times wants to complete before March, they want to come out with the tender because of the expenses and whatnot, etc. So I think that needs to be avoided and get people on board right from the beginning, which is very much possible. And I think there is a bright and a huge future, particularly in public domain, because now I think India in next 20 years is going to really work on this.
That's great. So, I think that keeping participation central to challenges over the next 20 years and perhaps, the next century are going to be very critical for us as precarity increases. So Nidhi, as each of you presented approaches to projects that sought to maximize the value of a single intervention to serve the needs and aspirations of many diverse users, something that often is termed as co-benefit. With the dual specters of global warming and pandemics hanging over this century and all of our lives within it, what new approaches and methods might we use to increase co-benefits for our streets, the public realm, and in our neighborhoods?
Well, I'll actually combine my answers to the first prompt you had said and to the prompt just now, because I think they're tied. And I teach at a university here locally too. And I think there's a lot of onus that needs to be placed on our education and the new practitioners that are coming into the world. So the first thing that I would say as a method of creating these co-benefits is to kind of let go of that hat of being the expert of everything. In architecture school and planning schools, we're often sort of a God complex is kind of drilled into our heads that we know what's best for people. We're creating experiences for people. We have to put that God complex on the side for a little bit and really think about ourselves as facilitators. We have to learn how to become masters facilitators to give people what they want. And let's use our degree to actually make sure that the little girl who asked for a playground that was fun, that gets created, instead of me saying there needs to be a fancy slide here and something else. So really sharpening those facilitator skill sets. And then with that, looking at people as allies, looking at people as partners instead of somehow the recipients of what you do, and really thinking about if you put it in place, they would come. No, let's go talk to them and ask them what it is that they want in place so that they become allies from the very get-go. Because to tackle big problems like climate change, we cannot create solutions for people and expect them to adopt it. We cannot just say from now on, you only get non-diesel vehicles that are electric. There is definitely going to be opposition, unless that was somehow their idea, unless they were consulted before putting the solution, so we can actually counter that opposition. So to tackle big problems, we have to understand whose behavior needs to change and how do we understand why they do what they do. So our proposals actually look like solutions to their problems instead of somebody kind of dictating any solution. So that would be another. And then as a constant sort of ongoing exercise for citizens, for practitioners to do is to always counter our own biases. Why do we see the kind of behavior that we see? And why are certain public spaces only occupied by men, for example, versus women? Why is that? Really get inquisitive and try to understand from the people's perspective why they do what they do. So build in that habit of countering your own biases, or thinking one thing is good versus another, thinking policies and planning in the US is the best, to thinking, what do we have here in India? What is our asset that we need to preserve before we reach for this utopia that we see somewhere else? I live in that quote unquote utopia, and I'm here to say, nowhere is utopia. So to really counter our own biases and really think about where did we get those teachings? And oftentimes it can be traced back to the books that we read and the things, think about your architecture school education. What did you read? What did the book tell you was the best possible architect, best possible policy? If we're looking for women's representation, did you read any books by women? Were there any women architects or architects of color who were not, one demographic? Why isn't that the case? And are we adapting somebody else's utopia to ours? So to really build in that, counter your bias, question everything, get inquisitive, and don't think that solving the world problem is in your hands. You're not the expert, you're not the God. You're a part of the problem-solving process, and become a master facilitator.
Thanks, Nidhi, and welcome back, Nandita. So, as we close, I want to thank all three of you, Swati, Nidhi, and Prasanna, for sharing your work so generously. And I wanted to provide one additional question for the three of you as a closing thought that you can share on before we turn it over to Nandita. From 2015 to 2019, we witnessed the world's largest urban project or program through the Smart Cities mission in India. There's been much critique, and I think all five of us on the screen have either been participants, observers, or critics at one point or another during those 5 years. But if in 2020 there might be a new urban mission in India that was proposed to benefit India's streets and neighborhoods, what outcomes should we seek, and what values and methods should be prioritized? Are there new forms of leadership, new coalitions, and new partnerships that you advise might unlock better futures for our streets and neighborhoods? So over to you, Swati, first, and then we can go to Prasanna, Nidhi, and then to Nandita to close.
So I think that if I had to say where they should start, I think that all great change ultimately happens at the local. And so I think if I had to say a new mission, what is the kind of focus that it would have, then I would say place the mission where the community is at the heart of that mission. Community and ownership. I think part of what's happening especially in urban India, is that we've lost the sense of agency, that the moment I step out of my house, my sense of agency is lost. My sense of ability of control, of being able to participate, of ownership is lost. And the further I go away from my home to the street and to the block, to the neighborhood, to the ward, and then the city, and then outside of the state, the greater is the distance and the sense of lack of agency that I begin to experience. I think what has happened in urban India, and part of what happens is the ownership that we had in our villages as we've urbanized. In a village, obviously villages also are their own cesspools. We all know the sayings on that. But some of the things that were there in the villages was the sense of ownership, the sense of community looking after a tank or a temple or an asset. I think what has happened is that governments in urban areas have sucked it dry. And one of the things that I really liked, in what I saw in the United States was small towns in Massachusetts, where ultimately, unless you have platforms and you have processes for citizens to participate, to engage, and to make their voice heard, not in a my baap sarkar kind of a way, but as a process which is institutionalized, which is formalized, which cannot be taken away whimsically. And I think that is an important one. So if a new mission like that had to be designed, then I would want very much for the community and the ownership to be at the heart of it, and to start with the local, because ownership will actually, the first step will be outside onto my street and then my neighborhood. So you can't ask me to talk about something which is removed. Why would you're asking me about Kashmir, but actually, you know what? I'm not even empowered to fix the garbage solution outside my own home, or the broken footpath, or the street light, or any of that. So then we all become armchair critics. And really the art of democracy, the art of debate, of finding conflict, of finding places where you converge, all of that happens most ideally in your neighborhood, because that is where I am the closest to impact on whatever change I want to make. So I would say that is what I would aim for, to place something which revives that sense of community, and revives that sense of ownership, and a sense of agency on the kinds of things that are being done for my neighborhood.
Great, thanks, Swati. And Prasanna, what are your closing thoughts on what that future looks like?
I must also say that in last 5 to 7 years, since the smart city has started, at least cities are now into the talking realm. They were already there when JNNURM was there, etc. But last 5 years, I think everybody is talking about quality of life in the cities. So that is a one win-win situation. What one should be doing is, I fully agree with Swati that it has to be bottom-up, communities have to be there, but somehow or other there is no system in place that the communities are part of it. So make communities part of it. I think there has to be some mandate with which until and unless community approves of certain things, it should not go in for the financial sanctions, So budgetary provisions have to be sanctioned, and that kind of a system has to come in. The other thing that I very strongly feel is the 2-tier and the 3-tier cities need to get a lot of impetus so that we have these top level cities literally not having the pressure of what it is there. But at the local level, if you are talking about only the streets, I have a very strong 2-layer suggestions. Somewhere or other down the line, one has to literally say that every tender which comes out, it has to reserve some 20 to 30% to do the edge for walkability, edge for people, the edge for the trees, etc., etc. Because today also many tenders virtually end up designing for the cars and the parking. The second major policy that I think again cities have to adopt is paid parking policy. Otherwise, our edges will be completely taken over by this huge demand that is called parking, and all the parks will also get converted into parking. Until unless parking becomes a paid parking, all our malls, all our theaters, everywhere it is paid parking. And the paid parking has also to become in a telescopic manner. The first 1 hour, 10 rupees, next 1 hour, 20 rupees, next hour. Then only you will be able to reclaim the space for the people and placemaking, which Nidhi wants to also come out with. Otherwise, these spaces will be taken over by the cars. So parking policy and a fixation of percentage for the edge is absolutely policy level, which needs to be put down from top so that the bottom really starts getting the benefit.
Thank you, Prasanna, and over to you, Nidhi.
Yes, I think there have to be mandates for sharing and redistribution of power because everything is about power and power comes from money and how money moves. So really countering, where is power held and how is power shared? With that, sort of shared responsibility and ownership. If we bring in communities, we're creating ownership for them, but at the same time, we're also creating accountability in communities so that people not only know that they have power, but also know that they have responsibility. Our manuals should be written in the way that they allow for flexibility so that we create unique solutions for each community and not cookie cutter solutions. Delhi does not need to look like Mumbai and the other way around, and we have to have flexibility so these codes can be adapted. We have to really check what we consider a benchmark. What is a benchmark policy? Where does it come from? And how closely aligned that is with our culture or how different it is from our culture, to not adapt somebody else's cookie cutter solution for our own, and to check our biases and benchmarks. +1 to the mandates for meaningful community engagement. And I would also say that there's lots of sort of lip service here in the US for community engagement. Meetings that occur late in the evening are very sort of one-way message delivery. We have to understand that families with little kids and older adults cannot go to evening meetings. They don't have that luxury. So really not just outreach and consultation, but meaningful community engagement. That needs to be a thing, and there has to be real money behind it, as Prasanna said. When people ask something, can we give it to them? Is there actual money to make that happen? In terms of our modes, I have a list of category of prioritization. I want to tell everybody that I don't drive, and I'm a fully functional autonomous adult. So to really think about how do you put transit at the top, and then walking, and then people cycling, and then rideshare before we think about individual mobility and kind of giving that power over to people. And I'll close with saying, we have to focus locally. We have to go back to a local economy, not just traveling shorter distances, but everything that we consume, how can that become local? Because there's a huge footprint to getting that watermelon in December from 1,000 miles away. And let me tell you, it does not taste the same anyway.
Thanks, Nidhi, for those thoughts. I think all three of you have kind of brought it home that power, leadership, bottom up, and locally led approaches. They're perhaps a direction for all of us through our practice is to explore new ways where we can solidify the bottom up approach in partnership with the institutions that kind of frame our project making in the public realm. With that, I want to thank all three of you, and we do have some questions from the audience, but I do want to defer to Nandita on time. I know that it's getting late in India, and I don't want to push our audience into their sleep and past their dinner time. So over to you, Nandita.
But I think we could ask a couple of questions perhaps from the audience, just to give them a chance to participate. Vineet, you want to?
No problem.
Yeah, just a couple perhaps, or just very quickly. Yeah.
Sure. So I've taken two of our audience questions and kind of combined them into one question for the three of you. This one comes from Kush Parik and Jocelyn Baby Matthew. And I apologize to both of you for hybridizing your questions. They were good questions in their own right, but I thought perhaps we could pull a little bit more out by combining. So in our oldest and densest Indian neighborhoods, the three of you have worked in dense neighborhoods in India and elsewhere as well. How do you approach design and implementation in these tight easements with high density, very high pressure on the street to perform at the same time that projects are being made? In regards to the dual spatial nature of streets, both as a place with meaning and experience for everyday life, as well as a corridor for the movement of pedestrians, bikes, and vehicles, what are the challenges that you face in keeping traffic moving without sweeping away the neighborhoods and amenities that draw people in some ways to urban life? So over to Swati first, and then to Nidhi and Prasanna as they wish.
I think Patrick Geddes was great in this, because he looked at the street in such a wonderful way and looked at it, what he called the surgical invention, when he was here and he was looking at neighborhoods and saying that we need to move away from an engineering approach and look at it in terms of an overall quality of life, quality of community, etc. So I think there are no simple answers. There's no cookie cutter approaches to this. I think you have to take it one neighborhood at a time and find the solutions one neighborhood at a time to respond to the new demands of today of both automobile mobility as well as pedestrianization, as well as community building, community associations that we have. So I think there's no getting away from it than to look at it neighborhood by neighborhood. We've had some of these very dense neighborhoods where we had the old traditional neighborhoods that we had done these TENDER S.U.R.E roads on. It wasn't easy at all because we wanted to give them footpaths. We wanted to make sure that there was a lot of pedestrianization, the shopping that was going on, the vending that was going on, and yet we needed to also move cars and buses, etc., onto those same streets. So it had to be designed. While you come up with standards and guidelines, you still need to design them individually, street by street, space by space, place by place, intersection by intersection. And that's the only way to do this. And you'll do as much as you can. So some of them you'll do in a manner that there's no perfect solution. So there are always going to be compromises. So it's a question of saying it's a wicked problem again. It's to say that what is the least wicked, or what is the least or what is it that most people are going to be okay with? So those are the kinds of compromises that you make, I would say. By the way, Porto Alegre was one of the things that inspired us in Janagraha, so I can move away from Nidhi's clear, unhappiness with where she's currently living. You should come back here. But also, if you don't want to use that, I think that, we need to be okay about not getting jingoist in a reverse kind of a manner. So you take the best from everything. Every society has something that's good and something that's not so good. So you take the best and try and see. It's not about saying cookie cutter and bring it here and bring it there. It's not that. Saying you see something good, can some parts of it, whatever is good, can this be actually taken? See how it can be applied, certainly in your own context. You're not wanting to lose your context or any of that. So I would just say, take whatever it is. If you say participation is not the greatest here, okay, fine. There's so many places in the world where they're great. But the idea of participation is something that you care about. So then you say, how does it work best in our own context? So don't throw away the idea of participation. Take that from wherever you saw it, but then apply it in the manner which is in your realm the right way to do it. So Porto Alegre, again, was something that we loved, and we thought that it was amazing that 50,000 people went into a large football stadium and placed a people's budget, in front of their mayors. And we did something similar. So we thought, my God, this is accountability to the greatest, the money, the power, and everything. All of it is here. So if people got engaged in their neighborhoods to demand accountability on their budgets, what's going into their own streets, into their own neighborhoods, that's the best. That's like what a democratic sort of a situation this is. And so we came back, but it's not enough because there's so many complexities, right? There's so much that It's all a city systems approach. You think you fixed one, but you've opened up another seam, and then you opened up a third seam and a fourth seam and all that. So I think it's a continuous journey and a process. And it's important that we keep learning, and we keep learning from wherever we find good ideas, and then adapting it to whatever our context is. So yeah.
Thanks. And I'll build on that by asking, a next question from Smriti Kupikar, which dives a little bit deeper in there in this question, perhaps for Prasanna. Across the world, cities are turning a few of their roads into car-free zones, either on certain days of the month or long-term as a matter of policy. This simple step has regenerated road space for everyone else, primarily for people. Do you think large Indian cities can move towards this model, not on holidays as tokenism, but as a matter of policy? As urban planners and policy experts, can you move from vehicle-centric design to people-centric design? And to add to that, how long do you think that process can take?
Well, that process can take a long, long time. And I fully agree with her that these happy streets and everything happening is very, very good. But on a Sunday morning, 9 to 11, when there is no traffic, it is fine. But it has to happen 24 hours, 365 days. But it is a long way to go. But I will add to that somewhere and say that that is one extreme that we are looking for, completely pedestrianizing. We still believe that let us start with equity and equitable distribution of road space. What is extremely critical to understand, and this also links to the first question that you had asked, that neighborhood should become walkable, and it is not that the car should not be there. The car should be there, but it is very, very important that the number of trips are reduced. The number of car trips is the real issue. I will give you a very simple example. Within my neighborhood, if I have to go to the mart and pick up 2 kilos of potatoes, 2 kilos of onions, 2 kilos of rice, so I am going to have 6 kilos with me. How do I go? I take my car or a two-wheeler because I cannot carry these 6 to 8 kilos along. So if my footpath is at one level and it can have the shopping cart or the old pram which is at my home, which I can take to the shopping mart, then I don't take out my car at all, because within 1 kilometer I can go with the cart and do shopping, and maybe my kid will be happy to hold this pram, and then hop on I will pick up the things. So it is a number of trips which have to be reduced within the neighborhood, because today the habit is for anything and everything, however small it is, I take out my two-wheeler or a car and I want to take it right into the shop, not even park somewhere. I want the two-wheeler inside the shop. I think this habit will change only if we are connecting the neighborhoods with walkability. And the shorter trips can always be taken by walking and cycling too, within 1 or 2, 3 kilometers. 50% of the trips, mobility trips in India, are less than 4 kilometers, and 4 kilometers can be done by bicycle, can be done by even walking to a certain extent. And that's why our infrastructure has to be in place. Road widths are limited. It's like the cloth that you have. You have limited cloth and you have to stitch it accordingly. And as Swati said, it is every bit is to be designed. It is not universal. It is not the same medicine for every patient. I may be a diabetic patient, but you cannot take the same medicine. You have to go to the doctor and he has to prescribe it accordingly. So I think the design is the key to this, along with people's participation. And you must reduce the car trips. And that will also happen once you put parking charges. So people will stop taking out their car because they have to pay for the parking charge. And then if the footpaths are at one level, people will use them and the number of trips will get reduced, and that will reduce congestion in the dense format also, what the earlier, I think, respondent was asking.
Absolutely. Thank you, Prasanna. And Nidhi, I'll give you the final question and you can reflect on the previous two questions as well, so you can respond. And this one comes from J. Jignesh Kapadia. When we talk about people first cities as a concept, often the social inclusiveness and environmental sustainability parameters that we all value, they're often missed, they're lost out, there's no accountability, and there's definitely not really monitoring and evaluation that brings it back. So, as I believe Jay Jignesh might be a landscape architect, but he's asked, how might landscape strategies be implemented as a way of bringing back those performance criteria for people first cities, for environmental sustainability back into the public realm. What factors specifically in the Indian context should be considered in the selection of landscape elements and maintenance in order to achieve those ends?
So for answering that question first, because then I'll build on the others. I think we have to really think about how can we make the things that we already need to do on our streets, the things that we already need to put, how can we make them multi-purpose? So I'll give the example of what Prasanna was talking about. You know, we have these trees, we have these tree wells. How can we make sure that a tree well maybe has a grate and also becomes a surface that you can walk on? Maybe you can add a bench. There are some new examples of benches that you see here. Some of them are metal, so not ideal in every situation, where the bench actually rises off of the tree grate and the tree grate stays, the water still goes through, but you also have a bench. So how can you make the elements that you use multitask while creating that, again, bottom line of we want to make sure that these elements are environmentally sustainable and promote sustainability in the future. So no single use things, how can you make them multitask so you achieve multiple benefits with the same element? And that makes it slightly easier to justify those things through budgetary constraints. Like how can you make the the swale infrastructure or the drains, how can you make, instead of those, make bioswales, which serve the purpose of being a drain in some instances, but also can be places where you plant trees and plant flowers and other things. So again, make your infrastructure and make your elements multitask, and that's one of the ways to think about that. The previous question about pedestrianization of certain streets and all that, I personally kind of steer away from full pedestrianization, similar to sort of thinking about, we need to teach people again how to coexist, how to cohabitate. How can cars coexist with people walking? How can people driving coexist with other people riding cycles? We have to give the other modes respect and respectable space, not take them away. Because if you take them away, then it still becomes walking space and driving space. You're still pitting them against each other. First, we have to teach people how to coexist, how to be with each other. And that coexistence applies to almost everything, people from different walks of life. We have to create mixing for people to just learn how to be with each other before we can start to different silos for different kinds of things. In terms of tighter city streets, one of the first questions that we were looking at, in dense areas, how do we make everyone happy? I would say, don't make everyone happy. Do the exercise, think about who's your priority user, who hasn't been in this space, whose needs have not been considered, people who've been missing in the background in the public space for the longest, and give them the priority to kind of even out the playing field. And that way, we can start to practice equity. We cannot ever please everyone. That's a very hard target. And to begin with everyone, we're setting ourselves up for a large target. Let's start small with actually practicing justice and starting with somebody who hasn't had access to learn to say no. And in terms of high-speed networks, there was a question about that too. Can every street be like a main street and every street can be like Chandni Chowk? No, there are places for high-speed network, but that's what it is. We have to have a hierarchy of streets. There's a place for high speed where, maybe automobiles can be prioritized, but there have to be other places where the automobile is not prioritized. What happens is if we create these separate land uses and you have to live in one place and go get that, that bread and rice and chawal and whatever, the 6 kgs of stuff somewhere else, and it's too far, then you have to drive. Your connection becomes an automobile connection. So think about the daily things that we need to do. And can we do those by walking? Can we do those by cycling? And then there is a place for the high-speed network to connect to cities, to connect to states, and then to connect you across the country. There's a place for each kind of mode, and that hierarchy has to be developed so everybody gets at least some space, some street where they are the priority user and don't really get missed. And I think that's all I had. So everything in moderation, stay inquisitive. I wanted to kind of say +1 to Swati, what you said. We have to take lessons from wherever we get them. I completely agree. I tend to be a little harder on the US because I'm currently an advocate here and my job is to build a bridge so that the wrong things from the US kind of don't make their way to the country that I'm from and love so much. I want everybody to see what they are strong about and learn from each other. I want Americans to learn from what Indians got right. We got jugaad before they got tactical urbanism, and I think they need to know that too. So thank you for that.
Thanks, Nidhi. And one other question that I'll pose for everyone here that I think is wide-reaching from Kavita Garg. And Kavita, apologies, I'm going to shift your question a little bit. Placemaking, as we've talked about it today, has really focused on the values we've had, over the past 50 years or so. The prevalence of COVID-19 as our species experience for this year. And next year too, is really changing the way that we look at places, placemaking, the design project, and streets. All of a sudden, a place that was one for which everyone sought inclusion and delight and efficiency is now one that people also possess fear, apprehension, and caution. How has your approach to placemaking changed in light of COVID-19, given that 2 to 3 years is a fairly significant pressure on the project making cycle, on funding, and on the scope of our projects as designers and planners? So just going back to Swati, and then we can go around to Prasanna and Nidhi again. What are your thoughts on that?
I think that this is a very important question, actually, that Kavita has asked, and I think that we're still seeing the ramifications of what COVID has done, throughout our city. So, for example, one of the big things that we wanted to do was markets, the city markets, the fruits and vegetable markets, and those are really dense places. For example, in Bangalore, we have something called Russell Market, we have something called KR Market. You have 1 lakh people, 100,000 people there, footfalls a day. I mean, and that's insane, and it's all cheek to jowl. I mean, they're jostling. There's no distancing or any of that kind of thing. So you see the economic impact, and this is the biggest one between rural and urban, the rural supply and the urban demand. This is where it all comes together, and it's devastated. So they've just opened up the markets, but you find that very few people are actually going. So part of the placemaking that we had, one of the projects that we had was the revitalization of KR Market. It's part of the Smart Cities projects in Bangalore. But it's been on hold, actually right now. So we don't know what is going to happen. But it certainly makes you wonder, what is a new way of doing this? And would we redesign this? And I think a lot of it is going to be dependent on whether we do actually come up with a vaccine for COVID, and see if there's something that can. But it's certainly, once you've done this, that this can happen at any other time. As this kind of a virus situation, this kind of a different kind of a warfare, so to speak, it can happen any other time. So then, do we design differently? We don't even know if this is one of those situations where, in the same way that we saw, the density, the urban centers become dense, and again, the de-densification of these urban centers, people will choose to work from home. It's going to become more and more prevalent. You've got all these Amazons and all these couriers, deliveries are happening at home, so people don't really need to go shop anymore. So a lot of this, you're seeing a changing dynamic in so many ways. And I think COVID was the kind of a final push. And it's still something that's at play. We'll see what happens. Will people all come back in hordes once it becomes normal? I mean, you already see it. And some places it's bizarre, because I went to Russell Market yesterday, and I found there was absolutely no sense of distancing. Everybody was behaving like there was nothing. There were no masks, nothing. So it's a strange kind of play that we are witnessing. Some people taking it really seriously, and some people not at all. And some people just saying, it is what it is, and let's just go and see what happens. But the cases are, I don't think there's any predictions at this point in time.
Right. So just quickly, perhaps Prasanna, 1 minute response, and then we'll close.
I think COVID has taught us that we have to take care of health, and we have to take care of health of our cities, and we need to change our habits. I think that is the lesson that is to be learned. We have been taking things for granted for too long, and I think that is what is a message which has come, irrespective of COVID. Our cities have to be healthier, and we can't take this for granted. What came to our rescue was the next Kirana shop in the house, next to the house, not the malls. The shop which was next door came to our rescue. And I think the government system of medical system and the government hospitals came to our rescue. So I think we have to virtually start rethinking how we have to get into this urban realm, and health should be the top priority. Things will fall in place, and habits should change.
Great, thank you. And Nidhi?
Yeah, I'll keep it under a minute too. I think for my organization and my personal work, it's literally been the triple threat. It's not just COVID, but the police brutality and racial uprising here in the US, and climate deniers and climate change. So it's kind of like three things all happening at the same time. And the way that it's changing our work and the context of our work is, first and foremost, we're thinking about diversity in our cities and in our public spaces, in our processes and policies and leadership, all of that. Why are people so sort of not opposed to, but unaware of racial diversity and how sort of similar or different we are where we come from? So who's represented in our cities, where they're represented, and how we diversify our thinking in our public spaces has become a top priority for people in my industry. The second thing that it's really shown us is the purpose of public realm and the purpose of democracy, the place of democracy and civil unrest in the public realm. What does that look like? What kind of intolerance and unrest is tolerated, and what kind of demonstration is not tolerated? That's another part of the discourse that has to be thought about. In terms of COVID, it's really almost made the case for the advocates, but in a terrible way, because this is a social justice advocate's biggest nightmare playing out in front of their eyes, where the neighborhoods that they were saying were vulnerable, the neighborhoods they were saying did not have public space and space for physical distancing now don't have that. And they're suffering negatively from that. So this is a nightmare, and that I can only say is putting a lot of emotional burden on advocates and people in my industry, but also asking us to, so the things that I was calling on our participants to do, we're doing ourselves. We're countering our biases. We're looking at what kind of placemaking were we talking about? What were we saying were the good examples, and are they good examples now in light of the diversity conversation and the racial justice conversation? Are they still good examples? Should we still be looking at Bryant Park and Times Square, or should we now think about Corona in Queens and Jamaica in Queens? So we have to diversify, and that's something we're thinking about. And finally, I would say is proximity is redefined. As Prasanna was saying, my grocery store next door to me is more important to the Whole Foods I like next to my office. And I have to think about what local looks like, even though New York is a relatively more walkable city and very connected with subways and public transit is there. But now with COVID, my world is my neighborhood. And how do we think about our cities going forward as my neighborhood? Does it have the things that I need? Why should I be a commuter, even if it's a kind of greener commuting? Commuting is under question.
Thanks. So thanks for all your thoughtful responses and the preparation of insightful presentations today. To the audience that's tuned in, we're very grateful that you've made it this far. I know we had some attrition over the past few hours, but thanks for your thoughtful questions as well. So over to Nandita to close us out.
Well, thank you very much, all of you. Swati, Prasanna, Nidhi, for your wonderful presentations. Vineet for leading a really interesting discussion, and yes, and for the audience for staying with us. And yeah, really, I think streets are very much sort of very contested. And we can see from all the many examples, but I think it's all about really negotiating, perhaps bringing in much more walkability, so it's between the negotiations between all the different kind of uses, and streets are not just about cars, we've all learned, and so especially at the neighborhood level, I think to understand that last mile, what happens in the streets, I think is really important. And so I think, yeah, thank you very much, because I think we did touch on all that. And so yes, very, very grateful. And I hope all of you can join us next week, Saturday at 6 p.m. Indian Standard Time, which is, that session may run a little long too, because we have two speakers, a discussion, and then a sort of a closing keynote, which will be really interesting. I think sort of going into the threshold between the the private realm and the public realm, which is basically, again, what the street is doing, but zooming in a little closer. And I think that will bring about, really interesting discussions, and then taking it back to the level of the city, which will happen through the closing keynote and a discussion there. So please join us next Saturday, and thank you again for wonderful evening. Thanks.
Thanks, Nandita. It was a pleasure.
Thanks, Nandita. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.